Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic, and if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic.
Jiraiya, where the hell are we going? I was following the large man through a crowded street lined with various restaurants and clubs. His hair spiked out under his headband and continued to fall to his mid-back. Its stark white color contrasted with the deep red of his hermit's vest. He was a strange-looking man and was still just as weird as the day I had met him. Jiraiya seemed to ignore my question and pressed on through the crowd. I folded my arms over my head and casually walked in the same pace. When are we going to start training? You promised me we'd start practicing as soon as possible. I shouted louder, hoping he would acknowledge my question. It had been a week since we'd arrived in the commons. We spent the time looking for housing and purchasing pots, bedding, and other necessary furnishings for the small loft we were renting above a ramen shop. Within that week, I had used up all my patience. There was no more waiting and no more settling down. I needed to start training immediately. Jiraiya halted abruptly in front of me. He was staring intently at a large billboard with a very scantily clad woman plastered on the front. Upon closer inspection, it read, Watakane Day and Night Club. Jiraiya turned quickly to face me. Look, Naruto. I came here to gather intel for the state and research for a side project. He put an arm around my shoulder and pointed to the club. That is where I'm going to find the necessary information I need. You have got to be kidding me. I rolled my eyes and shrugged off his shoulder. This isn't a fucking joke, old man. We're going to the training grounds now. A few people turned to look at me. I was ready to start a brawl with the geezer right there. He was starting to get on my last nerve. Annoyingly enough, Jiraiya wasn't even looking at me. His eyes were glazed over as he looked wistfully towards the club. I waved my hands over his face. Hey, right here. Hi, yeah, I'm Naruto. You know, the guy you promised to train. Yeah, see, I need the training to bring back Sasuke, you know, Uchiha Sasuke. Which is why we came here. To train, not to fuel your perverted habits. Jiraiya quickly turned back to me as a few more people continued to stare at the scene. He hastily pulled me aside. Look, Naruto, I know you're really intent on this. Let's go find Sasuke. Crap, but what I'm doing is more important than finding your boyfriend. He paused as he stole a glance back at the sign. Here's the new plan. I'm going to go on in and do some research. You take the rest of today to go explore the city and maybe find some friends who are less intent on the whole revenge thing. In fact, why don't you go into the bazaars and find something really nice for that one pink-haired friend of yours? He looked at me slyly. Girls love trinkets. I took a moment to think. It would be nice to get away from Jiraiya for a bit, and a few hours to myself were well needed. Plus, I had never been to commons and exploring the place seemed worth the time. Sakura probably forgot about me by now though. Jiraiya looked down at me and stared for a bit. He placed a large hand on top of my spiky hair and tousled it. I wouldn't worry about that. You're not one to be easily forgotten. He readjusted his satchel and began to walk toward the club. Before he entered, he turned around to say one last thing. Buy her something nice. I'll see you at home. He then disappeared into the building. I turned in the opposite direction and let myself get swept away in the crowd. I'd never been to such a place before. A whole other world was slowly unraveling in front of me. Everything was adorned in vibrant colors and the sun seemed to shine just a little bit brighter there. Not a single piece of rubbish could be found on the streets, and the law enforcement was polite and approachable. The people were much happier and children played carelessly on the streets. The streets were wide and paved smoothly with small flat stones. Sometimes the path would branch into small side roads where banners were hung at the entrance. They read, Hamilton Bazaar, or Estranbel Bazaar, with bright colors and gold writing. Past the banners I could spot small kiosks and vendors selling sweet desserts or intricate shawls. Finally the path ended and a maze of colors and shops started. Above my head hung a sign reading, "The Great Nefera Bazaar." Once I stepped past the large hanging, my body was transported to a completely different world. My sense of smell was attacked by different aromas, all vying for my immediate attention. Spices wafted around me, making my stomach rumble, but soon after the scents of various flowers distracted my mind from the hunger. My mind fell into a daze as I absent-mindedly strolled through the stalls, allowing my eyes to feast on the unending spectacle. Vendors and customers haggled prices, street performers sang melodic tunes, and laughing. There was so much laughing that I found myself grinning without prompt. The entire experience was euphoric. It wasn't until I noticed the reddest, plumpest, and most juiciest apples I had ever seen on this blessed earth that I realized the extent of my hunger. Hinata POV. I woke up earlier than usual that particular morning. At 5 o'clock promptly I opened my eyes and laid awake under the pale lavender covers for 10 minutes. I took the time to review my plans for the day. From 5:15 to 6 o'clock, I would take care of showering and personal grooming. At 6 o'clock I would prepare my father's morning tea, which I would deliver by hand to his personal chambers at 6:15. I then spend the next hour and a half studying my learning materials while overseeing Hanabi's training. Once Hanabi is done with her lesson, it is my turn to practice sparring with her, which was always a daunting task. It would not be until 11 that I was allowed to go about my day in peace. Today was especially important because it was the first time in a few weeks that I was able to see my closest friend Tenten. She had left the country for some time on mission, leaving me to myself for the first time in many years. It was startling how reliant on her company I was, but it should not have come as much surprise. "You can and will get through this morning. You have done it for years and you can do it today." For some reason I needed the extra motivation to keep myself sane. The anxiety from staying in the compound for so long was taking an exaggerated effect on me. I knew I needed to leave the compound at the earliest possible convenience. I went through the motions of the day without much thought. Shower. Get dressed. Say good morning to the elders. Pour hot water. Filter tea leaves. Walk to father's room. Greet him appropriately. Fill the cup. Excuse myself. Stare at the same page for an hour. Dodge Hanabi's kick. Fall. Finally I picked myself up from the floor for the umpteenth time that morning. Hanabi waved her hand in a motion that meant, "I'm done." She picked up her towel and water and left the sparring arena without even saying a word. As I dusted off my uniform, I spotted a familiar face from the corner of my eye. Neji had been watching the end of our session, and from the smirk on his face, I could tell he enjoyed the final blow. Neji was my cousin, my father's brother's son, who belonged to the branch house of Hyuga. Though he was older, he had no legitimate right to the Hyuga main household, and having been orphaned at a young age he was subject to the authoritarian rule of my father. Even though he was more skilled and a better candidate for future head of household, Neji was denied the position because of his birth. Instead that seat falls to me, or more likely to Hanabi. He approached slowly, taking his time to greet me. He looked over the tattered state of the uniform and knew that this morning, like every morning before, was another win for Hanabi. "Good morning Hinata-sama. Good morning Neji-san. I understand you have plans to meet Tenten-san today." He didn't look at me when he asked the question, but instead took to examining a nearby flowering tree. "That is correct. If it would not cause you any trouble, would you please inform Tenten-san that I will be requiring her services this evening at golden hour?" "Of course." Without another word he turned away from the tree, gave a small bow, and left the room. Once I had seen his long hair swish around the corner, I breathed a sigh of relief. All my encounters with Neji gave me great anxiety. I picked up my books and remaining material and went to drop them off in my bedroom. In the cavernous room, I donned on casual but elevated common street wear. The outfit of a relaxed kimono and long skirt was one of my favorites. It allowed me to blend in with the civilians when I left the compound, but was still elegant enough that if I were to ever bump into another member of the royal family, I would not disgrace my father. Completely. Before anyone else had a chance to steal away my time, I hurried out of the compounds. My feet rushed through the main gates, then stealthily made my way to the Great Nefera Bazaar. I walked the same paths I usually took to get to the stall where I first met up with Tenten. We were originally introduced through Neji. They had both graduated from military academy and were placed in the same unit. She came around the compound one day and took the time to introduce herself and get to know me. It was the first time that someone had engaged in an honest and sincere conversation with me. Tenten proposed that we meet at a particularly favorite stall of hers, one owned by a trusted weapons merchant. Our friendship blossomed into the mature flower it is today from that one initial meeting. To think that Neji gave me the first meaningful relationship in my life. As I walked past familiar stalls, something unusual caught my eye. A boy roughly my age with bright yellow hair was crouched over a barrel of apples. Many people were also staring at him, though he didn't seem to notice. Yellow hair, they all whispered. It was an unusual feature to have around this area. Gray, black, brown, red, even purple was more common. No one had seen yellow hair since the fourth Hokage. He stared intently at the apples and then looked up to speak to the merchant. In this moment my heart stopped. His eyes were crystal blue, the color of Lapus lazuli, the same shade as the oceans. He grinned and pouted through pink soft lips. Without even realizing it, I was making my way towards the young man. The closer I approached, I could hear him say, "I don't have money for that." The words came out of my mouth before I could really think about what I was doing. Naruto POV. T take an A apple. I'll PP pay for it. I broke away from my intense conversation with a particularly strict merchant who wasn't going to sell me an apple for free. As I glanced to see who spoke, my eyes laid upon a girl with long dark blue hair. From what I could tell, her face was bright red, but it was hard to see since she was staring straight at the ground. I looked around to make sure she wasn't talking to someone else. "Oh, I'm sorry. IWW was talking to YU. Please take an apple." She stuttered and stumbled over her words. "Wait, really? Thanks." I grabbed an apple and took a healthy bite out of it. I glanced at her again. She had pale skin that was currently flushed from what I assumed was a sunburn, though it didn't seem like she got out much. Her hair was braided back, but some strands escaped their binds and fell gently on the sides of her face. The girl refused to make eye contact, but with the angle at which she looked to the floor I could see long wispy lashes that framed her eyes. From what I could tell, she was a very beautiful girl. As I went to take another bite of the apple, the vendor approached me for money. I turned to her. The girl quickly dug into her pockets and after a few seconds she froze. Finally looking up, she turned to the merchant. Sir." She started hesitantly. He was a big macho guy with hair up the wazoo. He reminded me of a mobster, the type of guys you really shouldn't be messing with. "Yeah, what?" he asked her in an uncaring tone. I seemed to have forgotten my money at the moment. "See, could I possibly pay you back tomorrow?" She stuttered with a very worried look. I glanced at the man. He looked as though she asked him to dance on the streets. He turned to me, then back to the girl. "Listen, girlie. He already bit the apple. So either pay or do work. Hard work," he emphasized and grabbed the girl's wrists to intimidate her. I had to step in between them. "Hey, let her go," I yelled at the man. He turned to glare at me. "She has to pay," he objected, though still letting go of the girl's wrists. He took a step in front of me. I tried to casually stand on my toes to try to look down on him. He raised an eyebrow. "But she can't." I pointed to her. "Then," he asked. "Well, I was the one who bit the apple. Then you pay." "I can't." "Then I take the girl." His voice sounded frustrated. "You can't." I stared hard at him to try to assert some level of dominance. The scene wasn't looking too good. A few people had stopped and circled around. If he initiated a fight, I wasn't going to engage in combat. It's not in my nature to hurt a civilian. That's way too many can'ts, ain't it? He started swinging his arm back and forth as if preparing to swing a punch. Judging from his muscle structure, I knew it was going to hurt like hell, but I was going to take it like a man. I couldn't hit him back and I had to stand up for this girl. He was ready to swing and I closed my eyes. Hinata POV. The man was about to land a punch on the boy who had so quickly stepped in to help me when I got him into trouble in the first place. In one sweeping motion I spun around, grabbed the man's wrist, pushed him off in the opposite direction, and maintained a safe space between him and the boy. I felt a pulse in my eyes and I knew I had activated the Byakugan. It was unintentional and must have awoken due to the adrenaline. The effects of my actions were immediate. I watched as the man's anger washed into a frightened look as he stared into my eyes. The boy opened his eyes in confusion but quickly noticed the man on the ground and me placed in between them. He glanced over the man to look at me and I knew what he saw. Pearly light eyes were now a deep lavender with veins popping around the orbital sockets. The man jumped back. Hyuga-sama, please. If you had told me who you were, I would have let you go. I need the money, you know. I can't just let people take my products. You understand, right? He asked very nervously. The man clearly understood the ramifications of harassing someone of noble lineage. If I told my father of his behavior, the merchant would be out of the country before sunset. The crowd gathered around us grew larger and I could hear faint whispers. I needed to remove myself from the scene before someone realized who I was and questioned what I was doing outside of the compound without an escort. IPP promised to pay you generously TT tomorrow. And now if you'll excuse me. I gave a slight bow to the man before racing off through the crowd of people. I must have passed 30 stalls before stopping behind a well-covered tent to catch my breath. My heart was racing and my mind went into panic mode. Before I had time to completely process the event, someone's hand grabbed the back of my arm and turned me around. Hey, you just ran off before I could properly thank you, replied the blue-eyed boy. That night I couldn't sleep. I had come back to the compound in the most euphoric state. After the meetup with Naruto, Tenten and I had spent our remaining time talking about her mission before she had to leave to meet Neji. Though she would never say it out loud, I knew she was excited to see him again. Their friendship was strange and almost impossible for me to understand. Tenten is very caring and compassionate. She's funny and quick-witted, always so fast with a comeback. Tenten flirts and can be somewhat of heartbreaker. Neji was the complete opposite. He was no nonsense and insipid. But they spent hours together outside of the required team meetings. Neji, on multiple occasions, has stated that he would only train with Tenten, though not for personal reasons but because she was the most qualified, which was as close to a personal emotion as he was willing to go. Even though the pair was an unlikely match, it made Tenten unbelievably happy to be with Neji. I had tossed and turned all night thinking about what I would wear and what I would say to Naruto when I saw him again. I practiced my speech and hoped to God that I could avoid stuttering. It was a result of my own nervousness and anxiety, but maybe if I calmed myself down enough I wouldn't trip over the syllables. When morning finally came I had only gotten an hour of sleep, but it didn't matter. My own thrill was enough to give me the energy for the day. I ran through my chores as quickly as I could have until finally Hanabi had stepped off the mat. I didn't even wait for her to leave the room before heading back to my own. I dressed in the clothes I had laid out the night before and checked myself in the mirror to make sure I looked appropriate. Grabbing a small money pouch, I opened my door. To my surprise, my sister was standing outside. Is something the matter, sister? She looked at me stoically. I gasped. Hanabi and I were never close, not for lack of trying. From early on the elders could tell that Hanabi was the more talented out of the two sisters. They had separated us, unintentionally, for a very long time in order for her to make progress. There was a year where I had only seen her once a week. Though I had tried a few times to strike up conversation, she seemed uninterested in my words or in me. We never had a sisterly loving relationship. I suspected at times she even looked down upon me. So for her to ask such a question came as a shock. I don't know what you mean, I said shakily, moving past her. locking the door behind me. You seemed in a rush. Merely looking forward to meeting Tenten-san. Oh, be more focused tomorrow morning please. She turned away and walked down the hall into her own room. I was a little taken aback by the conversation, but I didn't have time to pursue it further. I wanted to be at the stall early in case he had shown up sooner than we planned. I stood at the front gates of the compound waiting for Tenten. She was adamant about meeting the new man, insisting that he be Tenten approved first before I go falling in love. Are you waiting for someone, Hinata-sama? Asked the unnaturally calm man who stood a few feet away. I hadn't heard him arrive and his words startled me. He stared straight in my direction but avoided eye contact. Why yes. I am waiting for Tenten-san. I stuttered. Neji respectfully nodded and moved closer to the gates. He glanced outside. She will be here soon. I didn't ask how he knew. His eyes told me everything. Thank you. Would you see care to stay and greet her? I already knew the answer. No, I'm sorry to leave but I am needed elsewhere. Neji replied without a hint of emotion. Excuse me. I expect Hiyashi-sama is waiting for me. Neji left dutifully back into the compound. Tenten came moments later and was immediately led in through the main gate. The guards formally announced her arrival and escorted her to where I was. They gave a low bow before heading back to their posts. As Tenten walked in, her eyes scanned her surroundings. Even though she would never tell me, I knew she was looking for whether or not Neji was around. Seeing that he was nowhere in sight, she turned to me. Let's go, Hinata. I can't wait to meet him. Tenten hastily grabbed my hand as we ran through the gates. She seemed as excited as I was. I suppose she was happy that I had finally taken an interest in meeting new people, a boy in particular. Naruto POV. Sunlight hit my eyes the moment they opened. It blinded me for a couple seconds. Stuffing the pillows over my head, I laid in bed a little longer. I imagined soft pink hair and green eyes. During the nights I dreamt about Sakura and during the days I longed to see her. It hurt knowing she'd never really like me, and even if she did it would either be out of pity or desperation. She liked Sasuke. I threw my pillow across the room and furiously tugged my shirt over my head. What a fucking prick. Here I was training to bring him back and I knew the moment I did Sakura would fall right into his arms as if nothing had even happened. That asshole could have burned down the entire country and he would still be a god in the eyes of Sakura Haruno. I shot out of bed. Fuck this. I mumbled. I threw on a pair of pants and shuffled over to Jiraiya's bed. The covers were made and a note was laid delicately on the pillow. We'll train at 2 p.m. today. Meet me back here around then. Asshole didn't even wake me up. I furiously kicked his bed. Jiraiya. I screamed into the air. I hope you get so drunk you end up sleeping with a man. I grabbed breakfast from the kitchen and sat on Jiraiya's bed. As I was chowing down noodles, I looked at the clock. 11:36. An unnerving feeling that I was forgetting something important washed over me and I paused for a second before taking another bite. I kept eating while watching the clock tick. A few minutes passed by and as my mind wandered a particular image came to mind. Pearly white eyes flashed through my thoughts. It hit me. Shit. The girl from the bazaar. I grabbed my jacket and rushed to the door. Just as I was about to leave, I ran back to Jiraiya's bed and shoved my remaining breakfast under his pillow. Hinata POV. It took us quite a while to figure out where the original stall was located. At exactly 11 o'clock we were at the apple stall. I apologized to the vendor and paid him triple what the apple was worth. But the boy, Naruto, was nowhere to be found. So I then thought it was the other stall where he had stopped me that he was referring to. My hands wouldn't stay still, almost as if they were hyperventilating for me. What if this was just a fluke and he wasn't going to show up? What if he was just being polite and didn't really mean to meet me again? I was having trouble paying attention to what Tenten was saying. Hey, he's not here either. Maybe he's back at the apple place. I suggested. We spent the next half hour walking back and forth between the two stalls. Beside me, Tenten was starting to get agitated. Maybe he's a no-show. Tenten sighed in exasperation. She sat down at a nearby table and rolled her eyes. Let's forget about this kid and go get you that new shawl you were looking at. No, I said with determination. Geez, Hinata's really got the hots for this guy. Tenten mocked me. She jabbed her bony fingers into my side, causing me to giggle. By our fifth walk around, we strolled a little slower and took some time to stop and chat with Tenten's various acquaintances. A few boys she knew from academy had come around to say hi, and Tenten spent a few minutes catching up with them. During their conversation, I stopped to look at a pair of green earrings. Suddenly Tenten grabbed my arms. Is that him? She pointed, her mouth open, to a man with spiked hair who was wearing the same jacket as the day before. He looked more flawless than I remembered. Naruto turned our way and waved. Naruto POV. I had rushed over to the stall, pushing past people and definitely angering passers-by. But I felt so bad. I mean, I was the one who asked her to hang out, and here I was completely forgetting our plans. I almost passed the stall if it wasn't for the loud shout from behind me. Hey kid. I turned around to see the burly man from the day before calling me over to his apple stall. When I came closer, he threw me an apple, which I caught with surprise. I raised an eyebrow. It's to apologize for yesterday. I shouldn't have been so rough. He looked at me with a grin on his face. Don't worry, eat up. Cautiously at first, I took a hasty bite of the apple. These are really good, man. Thanks, kid. My wife and I have a farm a little while south of here. It's not much, but we make enough off of it. The vendor began to regale me with a tale about farm life and working with his wife. I was half paying attention. As he delved deeper into his story, I scanned around hoping to find the girl from yesterday. Though I was half an hour late, for some reason I expected her to stay and wait for me. It was a little selfish, but some part of me really hoped to make a stable friendship for once in my life. She was here a few times. I broke out of my thoughts. The man stared directly at me with an all-knowing look. She'll be making another round, I'm sure, so don't worry. For the first time I smiled at him and took a larger bite from the apple. We talked for some time about his life and joked about the events of the previous day. Throughout the conversation I made sure to keep lookout for Hinata, and I finally saw her in the crowd. She was with a girl with chocolate brown hair tied in two buns on top of her head. The girl had pointed at me and I began to wave. They walked slowly towards me. Hey, I shouted to them, rushing to close the distance. I must have walked too quickly because I almost tripped over a small rock. I caught myself before I fell, but I was within a few inches from her face. I took the opportunity to apologize. Grabbing both shoulders, I leaned in closer until I was looking straight into her eyes. I am so incredibly sorry for being late. I don't know what I was thinking, it just slipped my mind. You're not mad, right? I asked, trying to do my best to convey my apology. She turned the color of a bright red tomato, and almost as if in slow motion I saw her eyes slowly close and her body begin to collapse. Her friend shouted in surprise. Before she could fall, though, I quickly grabbed her. What the hell did you do? The other girl shouted. She looked absolutely furious as she took Hinata out of my arms and pulled her over to a nearby bench. After seating Hinata down, she whipped around to shoot me daggers. I honestly had no clue what had happened, but clearly fainting wasn't something Hinata did often. I don't know what happened. Is she okay? I moved to sit next to her. The friend pushed me away and took my seat instead. Stop being useless and go get some water. She commanded me, pointing towards a nearby fountain. I looked at her in exasperation. Who was she to order me around? But with little choice I begrudgingly rushed to the fountains and scooped some of the cool water into my cupped hands. Carefully I walked over to the girl as she dipped long, thin fingers into the water and splashed them onto Hinata's face. Delicate eyelids began to flutter. Hina, are you okay? The brunette questioned with panic in her voice. It took Hinata a few seconds to process her surroundings. She looked at me, then looked away very quickly. Hinata turned to her friend. I'm okay, Tenten. Hinata grabbed her friend's hand in reassurance. I moved in closer to make my presence. Oh, thank God. Geez, why'd you have to scare us like that? I laughed. Her friend continued to glare at me, but Hinata giggled. Upon hearing her laughter, the friend's scowl lessened. Naruto-kun, this I is my FF friend Tenten-san. The brunette placed her hand out and I quickly shook it. I was in a bit of a shock. No one in my entire life had ever called me Naruto-kun. It seemed foreign to hear someone use the suffix. I'm Naruto. Nice to meet you. Tenten scoffed and crossed her arms as she leaned back against the frame of the bench. I tried to ignore her behavior. So what do you guys usually do here? Tenten laughed haughtily. Well, we're in a bazaar, so probably shop. Her tone was meant to patronize me, but I wasn't going to let her get to me. I didn't know why, but this girl did not like me very much. Alright, so why don't you show me some of the stall you like best? I aimed my question towards Hinata, who just nodded her head and got up off of the bench. She walked next to me as Tenten followed silently behind us. As I tried to talk to Hinata, I could feel her friend's eagle eyes watching me with fierce protection. With my best attempt, I ignored her glare and began questioning Hinata on the area. She was very quiet and slow to respond, and her mumbling forced me to move closer to her, and as I did I could feel Tenten's anger intensified. Finally we stopped at a small open market where Hinata meandered silently past the stalls. Tenten stopped us on occasion to talk to some of the merchants or other patrons. She broke out of her angry state and turned into an incredibly animated and friendly person. I was completely confused as to why she was acting like such a witch to just me. I tuned out her behavior and focused back on Hinata. She seemed to have recovered, though her face was still a bright pink. She gave most of her attention towards a small bracelet. So is she always this hostile? Hinata looked up at me with a confused expression. I nodded my head towards Tenten, who was currently smiling at a group of young girls. I don't understand. Never mind, I said quickly as Tenten started to approach us. She grabbed the bracelet from Hinata's hands and examined it. It's cute, she started, but I find that I don't like things that are too flashy. She casually glanced at me as a smirk played on her lips. She was quickly becoming way too annoying. You sure you don't have somewhere else to be? I chimed innocently. She scoffed and gave the bracelet back to Hinata. Nope, nowhere else but here. She challenged. Her eyes looked past me to a clock hanging in the tent behind me. They widened with surprise. Shit. I have to go. Damn it, Neji's going to kill me. She took off down the street. I stood there in amazement. What just happened? My CC cousin is her SP sparring partner. He is Saint Strict. She watched as Tenten disappeared into the distance. So what do you want to do now? I asked as we continued to walk. There are some street performances why you might enjoy. She said, nodding towards a group of mixed-matched people dressed in strange clothing. I took her word for it and followed her lead. My dull and enthusiastic life seemed a little more exciting after my first encounter with Naruto-kun. It had been a few weeks since then and we had met almost every day. We had a perfectly synchronized routine. I would go meet him, he would arrive late, we would laugh and have a good time. Sometimes Naruto would buy an apple for me and the man behind the counter would shake his head and smile. Young love. He would chuckle and pass the fruits to Naruto, who was oblivious enough to ignore the comment while I was too shy to address it. I never minded though. The quality I loved most in Naruto was the thing I envied. He, for some inexplicable reason, could easily express himself and his emotions even if he didn't want to. With one look anyone could tell if he was feeling upset or excited. Just by walking down a road he was able to make a whole street cheer up with one smile. Naruto made friends with everyone and anyone within a foot radius. He had an aura of strength and confidence that influenced those around him. It was because of this nature that Tenten eventually softened up to him. They showed their familiarity through sharp insults and comebacks, most of which were aimed at Naruto by Tenten. He could never keep up with her words and most arguments ended in laughter by the both of them. I had laughed and smiled more in those last couple weeks than I had my entire life. There was an evening when I had come home to find my jaws were sore from overuse. Each smile he threw at me forced my mouth into a grin. His words brought brightness to my eyes. Every joke unleashed a sensation in my chest that forced me to giggle. Each and every day made my life better. It made me happier. I knew the whole Hyuga house could tell something was different about me. Hanabi smirked when I passed by. Hiyashi-sama would raise an eyebrow when he saw me smiling because I was thinking of a joke or story Naruto-kun had told me. Neji looked ready to admit me to a hospital when I laughed in the tea room. I wasn't deaf. I heard what they said about me. The 3 different compounds had 3 different theories. I suspect she's taken a liking to one of her suitors. A more optimistic elder had ventured a quiet guess as I walked about of the room. It was almost laughable to hear how optimistic the woman sounded. If that was the case, that this woman's suspicions were correct, my father would be very pleased. He had been looking for an acceptable suitor for some time now. However, all of the eligible men who entered the compound seeking my hand in marriage were rejected for one of 3 reasons. Hiyashi-sama may not have thought the man's achievements were outstanding enough to marry into the Hyuga family. In the case that the man passed the first test, the elders would consult an astrologist to see if our signs and typology aligned. But more often than not, the suitor would be rejected by Hanabi. She maintained final say as potential head of the house, and if she didn't deem the suitor fit, then he wouldn't marry me. I was thankful Hanabi was picky in this regard, for it granted me a few extra years. The branch house had a completely different theory on my enthusiasm. She knows she's doomed, Neji said in a low voice to another member of the branch house as I passed by, smiling to myself. His theory was that I finally accepted the misery that was my future, and the hellish vision muddled my brain. I wasn't truly happy, but in a delusional stupor, and perhaps they were right. Finally, it was the servants who recognized the truth. Poor girl, I heard them saying as I sauntered through their quarters. She fell in love. No. A particularly old and bashful woman shook her head in shock. The first maid, younger in years but still old enough to be my own grandmother, waved her hands about. I'm telling you, she fell in love with someone. All the signs are there. Don't you recall being in love? She laughs when no one is near, and just look at the way she holds herself. Her head is in the clouds. The maid pressed her point by jabbing a finger into the chest of the second woman. If she is, as you say, in love, it won't end well. Poor thing, the older one said with a sigh as she folded white linens. Poor thing, the first repeated. My heart gave out. Poor thing. Naruto POV. Isn't life such a beautiful thing? I shouted as I slung an arm around Jiraiya's shoulder. He gave me with a questioning look as we walked back from an early morning practice. I felt alive and spirited after hours of rigorous training. The sunrise looks beautiful. The wind feels so good. Everything just seems so amazing. I sighed, putting all of my weight onto the old pervert. He pushed me off and allowed me to fall onto the ground. It took me a few seconds to stand back up because part of me would have just laid there. Naruto, he began, why are you acting so strange? I gave him a quizzical look. Strange? You seem a bit different. What exactly is it you've been doing during the day? I sighed as we stepped in front of the apartment door. Just hanging out with a friend, I said vaguely. Jiraiya gave me a knowing smile as he closed the door behind me. I ignored him and rushed over to the kitchen and began drinking the carton of milk in the fridge. So it's a girl. He shot a wolfish grin. Jiraiya dropped his equipment bag and moved towards the door. Use protection. Before the carton could make contact with his head, he had vanished behind the green door. Instead, milk splattered across the floor. Pervert. I mumbled and threw a dish towel over the spill. Stupid sensei. I hope those whores steal his clothes. My relationship with Hinata wasn't like that. We were just friends, and besides, I liked Sakura. But I wasn't going to let his comment ruin my day. I grabbed my jacket and went to the mirror to get one last look at myself before leaving. Looking good, Naruto. I winked at my reflection. A huge smirk played on my face. Suddenly a memory of Sasuke flooded into my brain. Idiot, he used to respond whenever I did this. I shook the thought from my head, closing the door behind me. I walked down the street taking notice of new tents and stalls that had popped up in the last few days. I thought to stop and look for a necklace or dress for Hinata, anything to make me seem less useless. Hinata had a vicious habit of buying me whatever item my eyes had lingered a little too long on. Almost like a reflex, she would grab the product and buy it before I could protest. The small compartment under my bed was quickly filling up with new kunai toys. She would try to do the same for Tenten, but years of practice made her skilled in the art of thwarting Hinata's advances. Bunhead was skilled at persuading Hinata away from the stall, but how she did it I could never understand. Hinata would stare up at us with innocent eyes that screamed, "I need to buy this for you." It was almost as if I were taking some sort of joy away by saying no. I couldn't say no. Not when those pearly lavender pupils lit up when I tried on a stupid yellow band or some lame necklace. So I let her shower me with presents as I stood there like a buffoon. I wanted to give her a present that she wouldn't be able to refuse but would absolutely love and cherish. Something that would make up for the multiple frog figurines littered across my apartment. I wanted to stop and pick something up, but the bell chimes rang and I knew I was late again. Hinata wouldn't care because she was the most patient woman in the world. It was Tenten that frightened me. She acted like an older sister to Hinata. I respected her, I suppose, but she scared the shit out of me. I hurriedly raced through the crowd when I saw Hinata and Tenten. Hinata was having a chat with Apple Man, whose name I still didn't know, and Tenten was flirting shamelessly with the many guys crowded around her. It's their company that appeals to me. Not them. Bunhead scoffed when I told her to stop being such a player. The horde of men scrambled away, some even daring to glare at me. I ignored it. Geez, why don't you just pick a guy already? Unless you already have a boyfriend. I gave her a smirk. She turned to Hinata and asked her why she was able to stand my voice. Though she evaded the question, I knew there was an answer. However, something kept Tenten from saying anything about her personal life. When I asked Hinata about it, she told me Tenten had always been that way, even keeping detail of her life from Hinata. She refuses to speak anymm more on the subject, was all Hinata could say. The apple stall man threw an apple my way. I caught it with minimal effort. Grinning, I took a chunk out of it. The beefy vendor snickered and gave a thumbs up indicating it was on him. I mimicked to show my thanks. He always had the best apples. There wasn't an apple on earth that was sweeter and crunchier than these. It was almost as if God himself had blessed this guy as apple guy, and all the apples he grew had magic in it. We took the same streets we always took. Occasionally we'd watch a performance or I'd talk to someone I just met for the fun of it. This time Hinata was greeted by someone she knew. A guy who looked to be in his late 30s. Tenten almost growled as she quickly stood beside Hinata. Although her face was calm, I could see the tension in the Hyuga's eyes. I know I should have taken to her other side the way Tenten had, but something caught my eyes. A small blue pendant, barely bigger than my thumb, attached to a silver chain was being sold at a kiosk. Immediately I knew it was the perfect necklace to give to Hinata. The blue would complement her ivory skin and the silver matched her cool tone. I tapped Tenten's shoulder and whispered to Hinata I would be right back. She looked slightly frightened but nodded in understanding. I rushed over to the stall and hastily asked for how much it cost. Well, I'm not sure you can afford this. He analyzed me. I growled in impatience and grabbed all the cash in my pocket. Since I hadn't paid for any of my expenses thus far, I had saved quite a few coins. Is this enough? I shoved the money into his hands and the shopkeeper took his sweet time flipping through all the coins, making sure none of the bills were counterfeit. Finally he nodded and handed me my change. I grabbed the locket and turned to leave. A few feet away I saw Hinata without Tenten by her side, looking extremely uncomfortable. The man looked lecherous and was moving ever so slowly towards her, closing the gap between them. I rushed to aid her. Hinata POV. This man wouldn't stop talking and I was scared beyond anything. The man in front of me was one of my suitors who had been rejected. We were in broad daylight and I knew he could do no harm. But the fear was still there. He had approached me with only the intention to greet me, but I could see past his shallow claims. In truth, he wanted an explanation why he wasn't good enough for the Hyuga princess. He was commenting on the weather or something of the sort when Tenten left for practice. He grinned as she moved out of earshot. How is your mother doing, Iizuka-san? I asked quietly. He purred. You're very beautiful when you're shy. Why don't you look at me when you talk? Maybe if you had taken a better look then we would be married by now. He reached out to grab my face. I would have backed up if it was not for the arm that arrived from thin air. Naruto-kun had stopped the man's hands before they could touch me. Izuka stared bewildered at Naruto. How dare you lay a finger on me? He shrieked. I cannot allow you to touch Hinata-sama. Naruto said sternly, though I could see a small grin tug at the corners of his mouth. It would be unwise to touch a lady so indecently in broad daylight. As you may understand, I'm only looking out for the women in my community. Naruto said with mock respect. Clearly he could tell the man in front of us was no ordinary individual. I was thankful Naruto had chosen a more tactful, and admittedly surprising, approach to handling the delicate situation. Izuka's face turned red then pink. He clenched his teeth and forced his mouth into a fake smile. Of course. I bid you farewell, Hinata-sama. He spat. As he walked away, Naruto-kun guided me away from the scene, still in a serious character. Once we were out of sight, we both started giggling. Well, I was giggling. Naruto-kun on the other hand was howling, almost rolling on the floor. Did ya see the look on his face? Priceless. He composed himself and looked at me seriously. I'm sorry, Hinata. I can't believe I ditched you like that. He was beating himself up over me and I could not let that happen. This was the second time he had valiantly come to my rescue, but I was not sure what to do. I grabbed his hand. My face, I was sure, was brighter than ever, but it was comforting to see a similar shade of pink spread across his own face. Thank you. It was all I needed to say. He gripped my hand. No problem. He gave me a wolf-like smile that showed all his teeth. My heart was racing. My mind was confused. My other hand began to tremble. Friends did this right. They held hands like a brother and sister would. Before I had a chance to sort out my feelings, something strange happened. Without warning, a blur flashed before my eyes. In an instant Naruto had disappeared and I was left alone in the bazaar. Naruto-kun. I cried out. Naruto-kun. It was useless. I stood there in shock for a few minutes before racing through the streets calling his name. I didn't care how much attention I had brought to myself, I was panicked. Where had he gone? Was he safe? What had happened? It wasn't until 4 hours later that I convinced myself to go back to the compound, knowing that my father would send out men to find me if I didn't return. Dragging myself through the compound gates, I knew the guards must have seen a pitiful eyesore, but I didn't care. I went to my room and laid on my bed for the rest of the evening, refusing to attend dinner, weeping silently into my pillow. Naruto POV. 1 minute I was holding hands with Hinata, trying to comprehend the strange shock I felt at her touch. Then suddenly I'm over Jiraiya's shoulders as he's speedily carrying me towards our apartment. Before I could protest, I was thrown hard onto the floor. Slowly getting up, I tried to respond, but before I could I was hailed with a barrage of shouts. Naruto, how dare you? Have you gone insane? What in the world were you thinking, mingling with a royal? I came up here to teach you and this is what you do. Jeopardize your life. He was mad. Beyond mad, he was seething. I could see his face turn scarlet. What the hell did I do? I retorted. Jiraiya squatted until we were at eye level. The position was meant to intimidate, and intimidate it did. What did you do? He said with venom in his voice. You made friends with that girl. He slapped me callously on the head. My skull hit the floor again. What do you mean by that girl. I screamed back at him, once again pushing myself off of the floor. What did she ever do to you? I growled angrily. Jiraiya's face was going back to its original color. Let's be civil, Naruto. He said through gritted teeth. Look who's talking. I glared at him. Naruto. Jiraiya frustratedly sighed. Talking to a noble is a taboo for you. No one else knows you're here to find Sasuke. That's not even the problem. What's more important is that the nine-tailed fox is in you. If word got out, you'd be shunned again. You think all these people accept you as the demon boy? They hardly remember how you look. You're safe here until your Hyuga friend tells the world about what a freak you really are. This time I had nothing to say. No retorts or comebacks. Instead, I just sat there silently taking time to process what he had said. A noble, I whispered. Yes, Naruto. That girl belongs to a family that dates back to hundreds of years ago. They are among the elite of this nation, the top 1%. Her life is worth 1,000 of yours, and the Hyuga do not take kindly to a commoner, especially a demon, interacting with their heiress. Heiress. Hyuga. Demon. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell her about the nine tails at all. I told her nothing about my past. I mean, she doesn't even know about Sasuke. I let out surprised at the cracks in my voice. It wasn't until that very moment when I realized that I knew nothing about Hinata and she knew nothing about me. We had spent almost every day together and knew so little about one another. What was her past? What was her family like? Did she have a brother or sister? She didn't even know I was the demon boy. What would she say? I'll tell her everything. She's my friend and she has a right to know. Hinata would never judge me. I roared at him in defiance. As if I was tied to shackles, my body refused to move an inch closer. Jiraiya's aura was enough to keep me in place. Naruto. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear the way you say her name? She's clearly more than your friend. Much more, and you're fooling yourself. Besides, she can't give you friendship, or love. He said softly. My eyes displayed the shock I felt. Love? What was he talking about? Hinata was only a friend. It doesn't matter. This is the first time in a long time someone has actually cared about me. I'm going to be honest and I'm going to tell her. I snarled. Jiraiya's face tensed, his expression becoming darker. Why are you here, Naruto? Ero Sennin said in a business-like tone. You're here to bring back Sasuke. Why is it that this girl had suddenly become a priority over the life of your best friend? As a noble, she knows that her time with you is short-lived. The moment her family figures out you're with their heiress, they will hunt you down. The Hyuga are an unforgiving family of cold-blooded killers. They are not cruel, but they're not people who will let the heiress mingle with commoners. Heiress. Something stabbed me in the back. It kept hitting me. All this time I had been with her, I knew so little. Heiress. She never told me she was the heiress. We both had our share of history and secrets that never came up. Why ruin a perfectly good day with depressing talk? Heiress. Naruto. I had a friend who was royal. This first Hokage's very own granddaughter. She was all I could ever ask for and more. His face hid a sad smile. But as a royal she had certain duties to attend to and I wasn't one of them. Slowly I faded out of her life and she did mine. But the stakes are higher for you. Are you willing to give up on Sasuke to please a woman you've known for less than a month? Before I could respond he added a comment that was like a chidori to the heart. If not for Sasuke and if not for yourself, think about her. Somewhere down your path, you will have to leave this place to find Sasuke. When the time comes for you to part, when you have to battle Sasuke, can you say goodbye and break her heart like that? I don't mean to imply that she loves you or that you love her. But could you be able to complete your mission knowing you would be leaving your friend, possibly for good? Knowing very well that she'll be crumbling inside, knowing she may never see you again. Make the pain end before it begins. Let her gradually get over you now while the relationship is still small. Jiraiya patted me on the shoulder. He had an understanding look in his eyes, the look of someone who had been through it before. I could do both. I'll still train. I won't let her come first. I promise to prioritize my mission. I just want to see her. My voice tried to remain confident, but he could hear the plea. Jiraiya stiffened. If that's how you're going to play it, then very well. But I promise you that if you take one step to go meet her, I will drop you as my pupil. You can kiss your comrades goodbye. He was serious. He wasn't bluffing. I could tell that he would really leave without hesitation, and it broke me. Finally, I found someone who I knew wouldn't care if I was a fox or an orphan. I found someone who accepted me and laughed at my jokes even if they weren't funny. I made a friend who didn't look down on me and wouldn't leave me. Someone I could count on. Someone who was expecting me that next morning. Someone who would worry for me. I realized my face was in my hands, knees to the floor. I wasn't crying. I was just. Poor kid. Jiraiya whispered as he left. Poor kid was right. That was all I was ever going to be. Poor kid. Ever since he left, my entire world became gray. Although I had only known him for a few weeks, those weeks were some of the happiest memories in my entire life. Now I had lost a good and important friend, a friend who might one day be waiting for me at the bazaar. It was day 12, 12 days since he left. I was on my way to the apple stall, making sure to check if he was anywhere within view. Tenten had intensive training all day, so she wouldn't be able to accompany me today, although I believe she simply grew tired of the boring habit. At first she sympathized and was also concerned with finding Naruto, but after day 5 she wanted to give up. I couldn't do that. Something within me told me to keep waiting, and therefore I never lost hope. Though the feeling was small and fragile, it was still there. Naruto might have been hurt or in pain if I wasn't there to meet him. He could be smiling and laughing with the apple man as if nothing had happened, or he could have moved back to the ruts. He could have died. No, I wouldn't let myself think those kind of thoughts. He was alive. I was sure of it. I hoped he would be there. I begged to the gods in the sky he would be there. Maybe today or maybe tomorrow. But as long as he was okay, I would be happy. Tenten wanted my life to revolve around me, not the happiness of a man I just met, but she didn't understand. I wasn't in love with Naruto the way she thought I was. This wasn't some naive obsession. He made me happy and free like he was. When I was with Naruto, I felt alive and not like the quiet, pitiful girl I was at home. I grew to really care about his well-being and genuinely worried when he was upset. He was someone I loved the same way I loved her. Besides, Tenten was a hypocrite. Her life revolved around the happiness of Neji Hyuga, and nothing would ever change that. No matter how many times she preached about being a completely independent woman, we all knew where her heart was. I thought she would understand, but I guess she just grew impatient with seeing me in pain. I walked along those streets once more. I never once stopped to look around at stores or merchandise. I ambled to the apple stall and waited. The apple man pulled up a chair for me to sit on. He too was worried about Naruto-kun. But that did not stop him. His business was still good and he was still happy and laughing with his other regulars. I scanned the bazaar as the hours grew longer and longer. It was almost 6 o'clock. The apple man closed up and I was soon going to have to leave. As I turned around, I saw blonde hair walk casually past the shops in another direction. There was only one person I knew who had bright yellow hair. Naruto-kun. I called out. He turned to look in my direction, met my eyes, and ran off, but I wasn't quick to let him go again. Naruto POV. Each day was as boring as the one before. All I did was sleep, eat, train, then sleep some more. Jiraiya said it wasn't healthy, but who gave a crap about my health? The only person who actually gave a shit about me was the person I was supposed to forget about. But how could I forget about her? Instead of the usual green eyes and pink hair I used to daydream about, lavender pupils and dark blue hair haunted my thoughts. As I sat around the house, I thought about our time at the bazaar and purposely made myself miserable with the memories of our friendship. Unless I brought Sasuke back, my life was a waste. It was pitiful that my only goal in life was to bring back the village traitor. I rolled around under the covers. Jiraiya's harsh voice broke my thoughts. Naruto, this is sad. Get up and live life. There are other people you can make friends with. The middle has some great girls. He winked as he pulled the blankets off of the bed, throwing me on the floor in the process. Oh, sorry. But honestly, there are other people out there. I expect you to go out and do something. He left soon after. I silently agreed with him, but I didn't want to put any effort into making any new friends. I liked the ones I had. What a waste of time. I got up and brushed my teeth, combed my hair, washed my face, changed my shirt, ate breakfast. Maybe I'd go eat something other than ramen. Even that had lost its flavor. This wasn't good. Snap out of it, Naruto. I yelled into the mirror. The man in it wasn't going to respond, so I knew I had to. Even though she was a fantastic girl, I winced at the word, was. There's little you can do about it. Calm down, relax, and go out into the world. I assured myself. I took my jacket off of the chair it was resting on and left the apartment in a sullen mood. Where was I supposed to go? After hours of looking through all the other bazaars, I had concluded that Nefero was the best one. It was almost 6 o'clock and Hinata couldn't possibly be there. Like hell she was. No one would possibly wait that long for me. Not even Sakura, my closest friend, could manage to do that. Maybe I can catch up with the apple guy and get me something to eat. I walked down the path silently, looking only at the ground. The stalls reminded me of her. Each kiosk was a memory. I could hear people call out my name or shout hi, but I ignored them. Every person I knew was someone I had met when I was with Hinata. There was the scarf stall. I smiled as I remembered the events from almost a month ago. Naruto-kun. It couldn't be. I looked with shocked eyes as Hinata stood there waving at me. Crap. I muttered as I sprinted off. Jiraiya would kill me. I wasn't supposed to see her ever again. I looked back only to see her running after me. Damn, that girl was fast. She kicked her shoes off, which made me pause. What the hell was she doing? This girl was royal. She shouldn't have been running around barefoot like a goddamn commoner. But I picked up my pace, though she matched it with ease. How was she doing that? Damn it. I didn't even know if she trained at an academy. I knew nothing about her. I ran through alleys and narrow streets, twisting through uneven bends, hoping to throw her off. As her pace slowed, so did mine, but maybe it was a reflex to let her keep up with me. She was scared, but of course I would be too if my friend was suddenly running away from me. Sasuke. The thought triggered me. I was doing exactly what Sasuke was doing, leaving everyone without an explanation or reason. Tearing up a friendship and leaving someone I cared about in order to obtain power. I couldn't do that. I can't stoop to his level. I abruptly stopped. So did Hinata. She was at least 3 feet away from me. I ran back to her and laid my head on her shoulder. I'm sorry, Hinata, I mumbled. We were in a dark alley. The sun had already set and I hadn't realized we had been running for so long. She stiffened, then put a hand on my back. I couldn't see you. My mentor. He told me that if I spent time with a royal I would be jeopardizing my mission to bring back Sasuke. How come you never told me you were the Hyuga heiress? I stepped back to look at her with hurt eyes. Hinata POV. Sasuke. Did he just say Sasuke as in Sasuke Uchiha? Hyuga heiress. I couldn't understand the chain of words. Hinata. You are the Hyuga heiress, aren't you? I nodded. It had never come up. I didn't think it mattered. I wanted to reach out to him, but he looked like he was in pain. His face showed he was struggling to think of something to say, so I patiently waited. I'm not supposed to tell you, but Hinata, you wouldn't judge me. You wouldn't hate me for something I have no control over. Naruto-kun asked, almost begged. I knew all too well what it was like to be judged over something I could no control over. Of course and not. And never. I agreed. His hands were shaking as he whispered to me. I'm the Kyuubi host. The 9-tailed fox kid. His face was pale and I saw genuine fear and anxiety behind the sapphire eyes. Perhaps I should have reassured him immediately, but I needed to process the words. The legendary 9-tailed fox demon. My Naruto, the sweet and kind boy in front of me, was the demon boy I had heard of as a child. Don't judge me. I'm really a good person, Hinata. You know that. He grabbed my hand. He flinched, possibly thinking I would pull back. But I did not and would not. Instead, I clasped my other hand over it. I don't care whether you are the boy who has the demon fox sealed in him. To me, you are just silly little Naruto-kun. I tried to smile the best I could and remain confident and calm. I knew this was a true moment of necessary sincerity. Naruto-kun looked at me in shock. It took him a minute to comprehend what I had said. You didn't, stuttered. He was amazed. I was amazed. Well, I didn't. Ah, don't start now, he teased. What were you doing at the stall anyways? I blushed furiously. I didn't want to tell him that every day since he had disappeared I had spent the hours looking for him. Each day I sat patiently with the man at the apple stall hoping that he would finally show up. That from the hours of 10 to 6, I risked punishment for breaking curfew for just a glimpse of his existence. Looking F for you. I saw Naruto beam at me. We sat there for hours as he explained to me that he was on a mission to find Sasuke Uchiha, the lone survivor of the Uchiha massacre. He told me his past, present, and hopefully future. I told him mine. I told him how I was supposed to be a strong Hyuga boy and how my father cannot bear to look into my eyes. I didn't want to go into any more detail, but he understood. He stayed there listening to everything. He shared tales about life in the ruts while I repeated my own sad truths. I was able to hear his hardships and woes. This was what true friendship was like. Ding, 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 ding. It was almost 8 o'clock. The Hyugas would be worried and I had to go. Hinata, where can we meet? I have to see you again without my mentor knowing. What Jiraiya doesn't know won't hurt him. He smirked. The Hyuga compound. He raised an eyebrow. Listen closely, Naruto-kun. I gave him specific instructions on how to get in through an old forgotten entrance. I'll see you tomorrow then. He waved at me as he left, and finally that night I found peace of mind. Naruto POV. I woke up the next day feeling a little over the top happy. Of course, when I popped out of the bed, Jiraiya knew something was up. Naruto. Did something happen yesterday? Shit. He was examining my behavior and watched as I casually threw my covers over the bed. I usually had trouble lying to Jiraiya. It was near impossible to do since I was already such a bad liar and he was a pro. But today a confident calm washed over me and allowed me to keep my demeanor straight. I must have been extremely determined to see Hinata because I didn't flinch or stutter. Looking up, I stared straight into his eyes. A new ramen shop opened up nearby and I'm pretty pumped for it. We should check it out sometime. Actually, want to go right now? I knew the answer before it left my lips. He was Jiraiya. Why spend a whole day at some ramen shop when he could be at a strip club? Leaving me with only a small nod, he rushed out the door. Jiraiya knew if he stayed any longer he would have to sit through a long-winded plea for ramen. I tried to comb my spiky hair into a neat hairstyle. Usually it would be a mess, but something about this Hyuga compound had me on a fritz. I put on my cleanest shirt, which, between you and me, wasn't that clean, and left the apartment. It was a beautiful summer day. The air was warm and the sky seemed to be a true blue. After passing by all the bazaars, shops, and clubs, I found myself on a normal dirt road. The road shrank into a vein hardly noticeable, weaving in between giant banyans cloaking me from the sun. My hands reached to push through the dreadlock-like roots blocking me. I stumbled upon a wall lengthy and damaged. It blended into the scenery like temple ruins, ancient and forgotten or simply worn from hundreds of years of use. I groped for a small crack about 5 feet up. What UHH have to do is Saint stick your H hand into an opening FF 5 feet above the entrance and P pull hard on the L lever. Then P press your hand against the TH third brick over. AD door should open. The wall slid over and I waited until I was sure there wasn't anything harmful behind the black entrance. I swiftly entered as the wall closed behind me. Using my hands to keep my bearing, I walked cautiously through the poorly lit passageway until finally I saw light. I stumbled into a white hallway. Juxtaposing with the mud and nature behind it, the entire edifice was pure white. There was a courtyard dead center of the square structure with doors etched into the walls. The precision and unity of the compound frightened me and reminded me of a monastery. Or prison. Fourth door down. I checked one last time for the noise of footsteps or human breath. Once I was sure that it was safe, I ran to the fourth door and knocked twice. It hardly took a second for the door to open and pale hands to grab me. I was pulled into a bright room the size of a dining hall. My eyes would have been the size of plates if not for the fact that my mouth let out large sighs of relief. The hard part was over. Naruto-kun, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just so glad to be here. I tackled her in my excitement. I brought her down to the floor and let her lay there next to me as I laughed. I heard her join in and we both laid there giggling and hollering, feeling giddy and joyous. In a moment of impulse, I grabbed her hand. Another shock ran through me and I shivered. Her hands were soft like I imagined them to be. Her fingers thin, frail like doves. I had to hold with such care as to not hurt them. I was nervous, sweating, trying too hard to be the man in the situation and keep my cool. But it was as though lightning had struck right there in the Hyuga compound. Your room is huge. You'll have to give me a tour. She turned red but didn't make any motion to let go of my hand. She guided me towards the center of her room. A large imperial-looking window dawned at the end of the hall, creating an ethereal glow that lit up the room. The walls were a white and the bed a pale lavender. Everything looked as though it had come from an unearthly fairy tale, as if I had stepped into the dwelling of a mythical creature. It was either the grandeur of the room or the excitement I felt, but I panicked. That thing. The seeing through objects thing. Someone will know I'm here. I worried, looking straight at her. Hinata had to realize the repercussions of entering a noble's house. Jiraiya would slaughter me. Her family might kill me then and there. But she just giggled, letting go of my hand to fix any imperfections on the ruffled bed. She moved around the bed and closed the translucent curtains. The W walls are impenetrable W with both sight and SS sound. No one can see through them or hear anything. I am a grown WW woman, you know. I need my privacy. She smiled at her joke and I couldn't help but smile back, knocking on the wall. You think they can hear me? We both choked out laughs. It seemed to be our drug. Laughing and letting our eyes meet, suspended in the time we spent. I walked around the room examining the trinkets placed neatly across her desk or bureau. Eventually my eyes landed on a carefully painted sequence of lines and names on the wall opposite her bed. In gold, Hinata's name was written, beside her in silver another name, Hanabi. Some centimeters away on a separate sequence held a name of equal level but color blue, Neji. Family tree? I asked, looking towards her. She slowly brought her hand away from the curtain and moved towards the lineage ingrained in the walls. Her fingers followed the passage of the branches and roots connecting her to her ancestors. Her head nodded with sad eyes that scanned the tree. I gave her a questioning look. We are a family of nobles. A bloodline limit that has been passed down for generations is the legacy we bear. Her fingers landed on the name Hizashi Hyuga that had a small date written next to it. So tell me, from the top. I want to know how you guys got your eyes. She took a few minutes to think. It seemed like she didn't want to talk about the past, but before I could tell her to forget about it, she began. There's this legend, a story that passed down through the roots. The leader of our clan, his full name unknown, was supposedly one of the few men in the world to meet with God himself. God called handfuls of men from each country to grant them blessings. When it was time for Konoha, God called upon a Hyuga, Uchiha, Nara, and Yamanaka. There were of course various others, but only those four names are still remembered because the other clans allowed their bloodlines to be tainted, married outside of the royal families, and destroyed the gifts that God had endowed upon their families. She looked disgusted as the words left her mouth. God asked each man to point to one area of his body which he wanted to enrich. The Yamanaka, wanting to be witty, pointed to God's body and said he wished to control the body of other men. God gave him this ability but told the Yamanaka that if he controlled another's body his own would be compromised. God turned to the Nara and queried what he asked for. The Nara also wanted the ability to manipulate another's body but he was smarter than the Yamanaka. He pointed to his own shadow claiming that a shadow is an entity of a person's being like an arm or an ear. He wished the ability to control the shadow that obediently followed behind man. God was pleased with Nara's answer and humility and bestowed upon him the ability to control a man's shadow and in turn the ability to manipulate the man himself. She sighed and chuckled a little, unable to help herself. God then asked the Hyuga what he wished. Hyuga wanted to see another man's weakness. He asked God to advance his eyes, to grant him the ability to see through a man's strength. He wanted to observe the very core of life itself. God did not appreciate having the secret of man's internal being known to a mere mortal. But he complied and gave the Hyuga this power. But to make sure the world was aware of this capability he took away the Hyuga's pupils as a sign that this man could see through you like his own transparent eyes. And that is how the Hyuga obtained the Byakugan. She pushed both hands towards the ceiling, stretching out her fingers. She ended the story but forgot a vital part that I wanted to hear. What about the Uchiha? She paused at my question. Hinata turned to me with sad eyes but continued the story. The Uchiha was greedy. He wanted more than what the Hyuga, Nara, or Yamanaka had. He wanted not to know a man's weakness or mere control over the body. He wanted to manipulate and mutilate their mind. He pointed to his eyes and told God that he wanted eyes that could hypnotize and enter the minds of all who look upon them. The Uchiha was asking for something to destroy all men. To destroy a man's mind is to destroy his being. But God had already promised to give the Uchiha what he had asked for. So God gave Uchiha the eyes of death himself and the Uchiha was pleased beyond his wildest dreams. He flaunted his eyes to the others who in turn flinched from its effects. God warned the Uchiha. These were death's very own eyes. Death is insatiable and so are his eyes. They will never be peaceful but rather restless, forever craving power. Uchiha paid no mind to this warning. His clan became the most respectable and feared family in all of Konoha. She stopped to look at my face. I could feel the tension in my eyebrows and knew that my face mimicked the horror I felt. The story fits so aptly to the current Uchiha situation and the unyielding thirst for power that plagued the brothers. It is said when Yamanaka died, his soul had already left even though the body was still alive and well. It is said when Nara died, he left only a shell, taking his longtime companion, his very own shadow, with him. It is said when Hyuga died, his pupils were restored for he could no longer look into the weakness of men. But it is said when Uchiha died, death himself had come back for his eyes, leaving a body with dark sunken sockets where eyes should have been. She shuddered and moved from the wall. It's only a myth, a legend that the elders tell Hyuga, Nara, Yamanaka, and Uchiha children to preach entitlement and false humility. Each one twisted to make the other clans seem foolish. She sighed unhappily, sitting on her bed. She looked out the window then at me. Don't take it to heart. I doubt your friend's eyes are in any danger. My face must have looked worried or confused, but in reality I felt surprised. You're not stuttering anymore. So it seems. She blushed, looking at her fingers. I guess I'm just comfortable with you now. Yeah, I guess so. I replied, shuffling a little closer to her. My face was becoming heated and my heart was beating strangely. I was having trouble understanding why I was feeling so weak at her words. She laid back on the bed, allowing her ankles to show. They were so pale and slender. My eyes darted uncontrollably towards the folds of her vermilion skirt where it touched her white skin. I wanted so bad to reach out and be the folds of her skirt, to let my hand slide down to her ankle. She noticed my gaze and sat up, moving her skirt to cover herself. I hid my embarrassment and sat in a chair nearby, trying to keep my composure. I was acting like a total creep. Hinata initiated conversation, taking my mind away from her lean ankles. We discussed for hours about the prices of food to medicine to progressive politics. The bright room slowly turned to a violent orange and I knew it was time for me to leave. I exited through hidden walls and secret forests back to Jiraiya, all the while thinking about Uchiha's fate. There is always some truth to myth. A group of people gathered in a dimly lit room. They dressed in deep blue, red, and black, holding hands in mourning. My hands pushed the people aside, moving towards the direction they were facing. Their faces were dark, incomprehensible blurs. Unimportant figures blocked my path, almost like swimming through a large and never-ending ocean. Finally, the blurs slowly pushed me towards the center as I heard sobs. Dull pink hair was spread upon a body placed on a stone tablet. Sakura. I remembered her pink hair and sunny complexion. The hair was pale and long, sliding to the floor, wrapping around her legs and feet. She kept sobbing, gripping the white cloth clinging to the body's torso. White feet poked out from under the sheet. The air formed vapor clouds as I breathed. I slowly moved towards her. Sakura, why are you crying? What's going on? I grabbed her shoulder, but she kept sobbing. I brought a candle over to get a better look at her and see the state she was in. As I brought the candle towards her, she looked up. Clang! I dropped the light in reaction to the horror I saw. Her eyes were missing. From her sockets, tears of blood flowed down her cheeks, caressing her neck. She sensed the light and moved towards it. I backed away. Frightened, I landed on the body and recognized the face. Eyes closed, covered by raven hair. I knew who it was. Sasuke. Hearing his name, his eyes opened suddenly. I walked backwards, moving away from him. He gradually sat up and then I noticed them. His eyes were green. Green like fields of wild grass. Green like picnics and years of longing to be a family. They were Sakura's eyes. I panicked and kept walking backwards at a faster rate. I couldn't stop staring at the unnaturalness. Hands grabbed me from behind. The blurred faces kept me in place as Sasuke trudged towards me. These eyes. I don't like these eyes. I need new eyes. Your eyes. Give them to me. His fingers slowly dug into my left eye socket and I screamed, feeling it tear out from my skull. I could hear Sakura still sobbing. The last image I saw was of Sasuke's eyes. One green, one blue, and together they looked frightening. Naruto. What the hell? Jiraiya pulled me out of bed. I was gasping, sweat covering me entirely. It was still dark out, but I was wide awake. I stared at Jiraiya, his eyes a comforting and familiar black. I held my head in my hands, rubbing my eyes, checking to see if they were still there. You were screaming like a mother. What's gotten into you? He sounded worried. I pushed his hand off my shoulder. Just a bad dream, Sasuke. He understood and got up to leave me alone to collect my thoughts. Now that Jiraiya was gone, I shuddered uncontrollably. The monster I just saw was not Sasuke. It was a ghost, an apparition, but definitely not Sasuke. I kept reassuring myself that Sasuke wouldn't go that far for power or revenge. I rubbed my shoulders and pulled off my shirt. I just laid there waiting for sleep to fall upon me. Here. Jiraiya pushed a bowl of ramen towards me. He sat at the end of my bed, laying his head against the wall looking out the window. What happened? I clenched the bowl, unable to eat, as I repeated my dream. He listened, then patted my leg and left. I waited for him to come back, but he crawled into his own bed and fell asleep. I slurped up the noodles and threw the bowl to the ground. The blanket covered my head, but my eyes were still wide open. I could still see the green and blue eyes staring back at me when I closed them. Hinata POV. For 2 weeks Naruto kept coming over daily to just sit, locked in my room, and talk to me like there was nothing else he wanted to do. Sometimes Tenten would join us and we would have fun laughing at each other lightheartedly. Today we all sat on my bed, Tenten's head on my lap, Naruto at the opposite end of the bed leaning on the headrest. Why is the entire kingdom so busy today? Naruto asked, tossing around an apple. I was slightly surprised he didn't know why. Tenten looked at him incredulously. You've got to be kidding me. Are you seriously this stupid? She rolled her eyes, sitting upright. It's the Akatsuki festival. Oh right. You light candles and get candy or something. Only you nobles celebrate it. It's like the one time in a year that a representative from the kingdom comes and acknowledges our existence. So what? Naruto was clearly not impressed with the holiday. Oh, shut up about your hard life in the country, no one cares. This festival is so much more, you wouldn't even know. Tenten crossed her arms and glared at Naruto, who in turn clenched his fists and glared back. They did this often, taking turns jabbing at each other. But what Naruto didn't realize is that Tenten valued this holiday more than any other. So what is it then? Some lame excuse to flaunt your wealth. Oh pish posh, let's get our servants to carry us around while we throw money about and eat yummy things, I giggled as he threw his arms in what was meant to be a fanciful way. May I remind you that I'm not actually a noble, hence the lack of wealth to flaunt. It's about this woman who waits for this guy and they're like soulmates and she lit a candle. I can't explain it properly. Hinata tells it better. Tenten loved hearing the story behind the festival. I smiled at her and began to spin the tale. There was once a beautiful kunoichi. Cause the heroine can never be ugly. Tenten cut in, irritating Naruto. If you're going to interrupt her every time she talks, I'd rather not listen. He told her, motioning for her to shut up. She took the hint and laid back. I began where I left off. While on a mission, she met a handsome ninja from the neighboring village. They fell in love immediately and decided to court. But a large river separated their villages, rendering them unable to communicate. So every morning at dawn, when it was still dark and new, they sent over small boats made of wood. Attached to the boat was a note and a small candle to prove that they were still faithful. For years the two sent boats and met secretly during missions. Years later a war erupted between the nations and the ninja went off to fight. The kunoichi remained behind, faithfully aiding her nation as a medic. The war was over and the kunoichi released her small wooden boat across the river at dawn. But nothing came her way. Every morning at dawn she sailed her small boats across the river awaiting a reply. Eventually the villagers realized what she was doing. They told her that her ninja was probably dead and she ought to give up. But she could not. She claimed her heart wouldn't let her, for she knew that he was still alive. Their hearts beat as one and hers would only stop once his had. So she kept sending her boats and watched as they floated away. She was beginning to lose hope until one morning she let her boat float away and looked to her right. Down the river, small flickering lights moved towards her. She realized that they were small candles upon small boats. As the boats floated her way, she grabbed one and upon it was written those 3 words that everyone yearns to hear. She looked once more down the river and there she saw her very own ninja rowing towards her. Behind him were the inhabitants of her village who went out searching for the ninja. Soon after, the ninja and the kunoichi were married. It is a tradition now. All the men are on one side of the river and the women on the other. We write the name of the person we love and let the boat sail to the other side. Usually there is a big scramble to find out who wrote whose name. It's very fun, I hear. You don't know if it is? Naruto questioned me. I felt embarrassed. I would not know. The Hyugas don't allow me to join in festivities of the public. I always wanted to see it and take in the image of small candles floating across the river. To look upon the faces of surprised and happy lovers. I wanted to witness the fate I would never have. That's so lame. This year you're going. I don't care, I'm going to kidnap you and we'll go. Before I could protest, Naruto changed the subject. So what else is there? I love it. It's like a carnival. The entire Nefera bazaar turns into little booths with games and candy. This year Neji promised to take me. She smiled, her eyes drifting towards the ceiling. For the longest time ever, she had asked Neji to accompany her to the festivities, and each time he denied her because he had other obligations like attending the formal gathering held by the larger clans. This year only the oldest members of royalty were invited, so he finally conceded since he wasn't required to attend the event and was free, only once, to go with her. Is his name going to appear on your boat? Naruto wiggled his eyebrows. Tenten threw a pillow at him. The battle had begun and I was excited for the day to come. I awoke to the sound of loud shuffling and things being tossed around the room. Pulling the covers off of me, I rolled out of bed and slid onto the floor. From upside down, I could see Jiraiya moving about in our small apartment, throwing clothes in every direction and searching through piles of junk and knickknacks. He seemed wild to find some item that was lost in the jungle of trash and dirty laundry. As he ripped apart his bed, Jiraiya noticed me, wide-eyed and awake, lying on the ground. Did you see a gray coin pouch anywhere? I pulled myself off of the ground, racking my brain for where the purse might be. Sure, I had seen Jiraiya with it, but I wasn't attentive enough to remember where he might have placed it. Check your pockets, I advised uninterestedly as I moved towards the bathroom to brush my teeth. I was in the middle of squirting toothpaste onto the brush when I heard him exclaim enthusiastically. I guess I just missed it. More shuffling could be heard from the other room, then suddenly the noise stopped. Jiraiya had managed to compose himself. I'm heading out for a few minutes. I'll be back real soon. Just when I thought he was about to leave, Jiraiya stuck his head through the bathroom door. This apartment is a mess. Clean it. Without warning, he closed the door and I could hear him exit the flat. I mentally sighed. Though he had made a mess just a few minutes earlier, I couldn't argue with the command since most of the mess was my own. I began picking up garbage off of the ground and throwing it into a basket in the corner of the kitchen. Once that was done, the next step was to grab all of the laundry. Jiraiya's clothes were, of course, already put away and neatly folded. It was just my own dirty laundry, in dire need of washing, that littered the floor. I scooped it up and shoved the clothing into a bulging laundry bag. The final task was to place the miscellaneous items I had thoughtlessly purchased during my time in the bazaar onto shelves. I grabbed a small frog figure and smiled as I examined it. Hinata had seen my coin purse and knew that my mentor was the great frog hermit, so she thought it would be fitting to buy me the little green frog, and as usual I didn't have the will to say no. I went to place the figurine on the windowsill next to my bed. Setting the frog down, I noticed another memento I had kept among my cherished objects. This one was a small stone, and written on it were the words, "For we will meet again." As I went to pick up the object, an icy chill fell over me. The charm was given to me by Sakura the day I had left the ruts. It was her way of letting me know she would miss me and a reminder for me to come back home once my mission was complete. But it wasn't the memory that had me frozen. It was the fact that I hadn't once thought of Sakura in the last week. Ever since I had met the pale pink beauty, my every need and desire was only for her. I couldn't and never stopped thinking about Sakura. Every thought and action during my time at the academy was dedicated to impressing her. My motivation and drive existed only to pursue her. Sakura Haruno was my self-proclaimed true love. Here was the girl that I had dubbed the goddess of my heart, and for the first time in several years, I no longer held the same longing obsession for her. My devotion to Sakura wasn't out of true compatibility or affection, I now realized. As I turned the charm over in my hand, I thought a little more about how I felt for my teammate. I had always said I loved Sakura Haruno, but what did that really mean? I fell for Sakura because she was extremely beautiful and incredible smart, both qualities that I respected. But her temper towards me, and only me, was disagreeable, and her own obsession with Sasuke was off-putting. Looking back, Sakura and I never had a true moment. There was never a time when sparks flew between us or my heart stopped. It raced, of course, but never stood still or sent a jolt through me the way people said it would when you looked at someone you truly loved. On the off chance that Sakura and I were alone together, she spoke to me like a little brother and treated my advances as jokes, either laughing at me or threatening me. When she did this, I felt sad, but it wasn't true disappointment. Her rejections never had a lasting impact and felt more like games or challenges rather than a serious love affair. However, Sakura was all I knew. Sakura was beauty and strength, and she maintained a fierce love for her teammates. Sakura was family, and I loved her in a more familiar and comforting way. I felt confusion and worry as I continued to stare at the stone. What was with the sudden change of heart? Why was I thinking these strange and foreign thoughts now? Hinata. Was it because of her that my mind had been empty of Sakura Haruno? Lately I had taken to thinking about Hinata Hyuga in the few moments before my mind drifted off to sleep. Even once I had entered my dream state, I saw her pale skin and dark locks. Her wispy eyelashes and lavender eyes. Those thin fingers and dainty wrists. Her entire frame dancing through my thoughts, flirting with me in a delicate and innocent way. The emotions these images produced were entirely new and different from the ones I felt about Sakura. They drew heat out of my body and flushed my face. Placing the charm back down on the sill, I shook my head vigorously, trying to toss the thoughts out. I didn't want to think about these things right now. It was too complicated and I sincerely did not want to delve into such treacherous territory. I used the techniques Jiraiya had practiced with me to completely clear out my head, but flashes of pink and purple whirled in my mind's eye. Thankfully, Jiraiya had pushed the door open, carrying with him a medium-sized parcel wrapped in a brown paper. He smiled at me as he entered the kitchen, setting the package on the counter. He grabbed a drink and leaned against the table. All the districts are getting ready for the Akatsuki festival. It's going to look amazing. He took a swig of the amber liquid. Also, the apartment looks good. Shoot. It's today. I slapped my hands to my face and pushed on my temples. How could I have completely forgotten the holiday? I woke up without even so much as a thought about preparing for the day. Hinata and Tenten had spent the last few weeks going on and on about the festival, and I totally blanked. From the kitchen, Jiraiya was chuckling. So are you going to partake in the merriment? He asked in a jovial voice. For some strange reason, Jiraiya seemed a little more cheerful this morning. I tried to stay casual and act uninterested. I don't know. Maybe. I shrugged my shoulders nonchalantly. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow and took another sip. It's a very big deal here. If you want, I can take you. I spoke without thinking and responded too quickly. No. I almost shouted at him. He put the glass down and gave me a questioning look. I tried to recover. I mean, that's okay. You'll probably be too busy anyways. Will I? Well, I could take some time from my busy schedule for this. Jiraiya was pushing it further and I was caught completely off guard. It's really okay. I seriously don't need to go. He said with a smirk playing across his lips. He picked the cup back up and took a long drink. So who's the girl? I could feel the redness seeping into my cheeks. In reality, I was just becoming more nervous as I tried to think of a better lie, but from the expression on Jiraiya's face, he must have taken it as embarrassment. His wolfish smile grew wider. Oh, looks like little ol' Naruto has found himself a new girlfriend. You gonna write her name on your boat? He prodded me for information as my face turned beet red. Jiraiya laughed loudly. I'm glad you got over the other one. He said with a sad smile. I took this lapse in conversation to put my acting skills to use. With a quick frown and sullen voice, I turned my head away from Jiraiya so as to act depressed by the memory of the girl that I wasn't technically supposed to be seeing. Oh right, Hinata. I prayed to the heaven above that Jiraiya would not see the smile threatening to burst from my lips. My voice was carefully crafted to sound sad and portray the idea that I hadn't seen Hinata. Jiraiya must have believed my lovelorn performance because he quickly changed the subject. Well, anyways, it doesn't matter. I can't go. I swung my head back around. What? Where are you going? Important business. Top secret stuff, so don't worry about it. I'll be back before tomorrow morning though, so don't miss me too much. TCH, as if. I said, making my way into the kitchen. Jiraiya laughed happily and tossed the package at me. I caught it in surprise. I know you don't have a lot of nice thing and you should look good tonight, so I went and got that. The foxes were a nice ironic touch. I slowly unraveled the brown paper. Underneath the covering, soft blue material fell down into my hands. Delicately, I pulled the fabric from the wrapping and held it out at arm's length. In front of me was an expensive dark blue yukata embroidered with small pearlescent foxes. It was the nicest gift I had ever received. I was sure that I had never even touched something so incredibly regal. I lowered the yukata and looked at Jiraiya with wide eyes that were threatening to water. I had to break eye contact. I coughed. Thanks. It was nothing. Jiraiya replied awkwardly, also looking away from me. He rubbed the back of his neck and walked towards his bed. He began packing things into a small travel bag as I gently placed the yukata back into the paper. Subtly, I wiped away tears that threatened to spill. I couldn't believe I was being so emotional that morning. Well, anyways, I have to leave as soon as possible, so I'll see you tomorrow. He moved towards me and placed a massive hand on my head. Jiraiya tousled my hair, smiling down at me, and in that moment I felt like a son to the old man. He turned away and left for the day. Hinata POV. Ah, I can't wait for tonight. Tenten yelled, throwing herself down on my bed on top of many layers of clothing. She spread her arms across the colored fabrics, gripped the pieces she could, and pulled them around herself. Tenten was in a fit of giggles, and I couldn't help but laugh with her, especially when she looked like an oversized cocoon. I can't even choose. You have so many kimonos. She wasn't incorrect in this observation. My closet had an entire wall dedicated to various kimonos I had collected throughout my life. Many of them were gifts from visiting dignitaries and other royal families. I had only picked a handful of them myself. The rest were, surprisingly, gifted to me by my father and Hanabi just for this occasion. I had asked my father a week ago if I may attend the festival accompanied by Tenten. Though at first he had given a solid no for an answer, he later came around with a yes after Neji had also asked for permission. I was allowed to go as long as I was also accompanied by Neji. Neji and I agreed and said we would meet at the festival rather than arriving together, giving me some time to spend with Tenten alone. A few days after my father had consented, my handmaids were coming in droves with armfuls of different colors, patterns, and textures. Hanabi had entered soon after, stating that she would not be able to attend the festival since father had asked her to accompany him to a formal event another family was hosting that night. Since she was unable to attend, she wished me a pleasant evening and said she wanted me to look my best so that I may present the beauty of the Hyuga household at its fullest potential. With those words, she left and had dismissed me from our usual morning training until after the holiday. Hanabi was starting to become surprisingly loving towards me in her own unusual and distant way. Since I maintained such an extensive collection of kimonos, many of which would never be touched, I offered them to Tenten. She did not come from a stable background, and having access to high-quality outfits made the financial burden of such a luxurious night a lot easier on her. I think this pink will look beautiful on you. I brought a bright rose kimono covered in green and white designs towards her. As I was scanning my closet, I noticed the kimono and immediately knew it would be the perfect fit for her. Tenten's eyes grew wide as she took the kimono and delicately draped it on her arm. You think? She expressed her insecurity, getting up to look into the large mirror. The color brought out the beautiful tan in her skin from hours of daily practice, and the greens strengthened the rich color of her hair and eyes. I knew she was going to look beautiful tonight. Yes. Tenten looked back at me. How is it you picked out the perfect kimono for me on the first try? She cloaked the entire cloth across her body. I can't believe you're letting me borrow this. It's yours. Think of it as a holiday gift. What? She turned back to me in surprise. Hinata, I couldn't. This is just so beautiful and probably very expensive. I don't want it. Tenten, please accept it. It will just lay in my closet if you don't. It didn't take much persuasion to get Tenten to oblige to the request. She stripped her attire and began changing into the kimono. I went to help her with the complicated pieces. You know, everyone thinks I'm a tomboy, and I mean I am, but I am seriously looking forward to looking pretty for once like an actual girl. Tenten, you always look pretty and you are an actual girl. She chuckled as I tried to readjust the shoulders. Oh, shut up, Hinata. You know what I mean. I always have my hair up and I never wear any makeup. I get to go full out tonight. And I can't wait to play all the cool carnival games. Most importantly, I can't wait to see the boats floating across the river. My face flushed as I thought about the upcoming event. I had been thinking about it all week, trying to convince myself that I should write Naruto's name on the boat. If I did, I knew he would know who wrote it almost immediately. Tenten seemed to be thinking the same thing. So are you going to write Naruto's name? She said, trying to get a good look at my face. I hid behind the long sleeve. He'll know that I wrote it. That's the point, you goof. Tenten pulled the sleeve away to look directly at me. Tonight is meant for people to confess their feelings, whether new or old. It's the perfect chance to finally tell him how you feel, and you never know, he might feel the same. She looked at me sternly. You have to do it, Hina. I'm not kidding, I will push you into the river if you don't. We both laughed a hearty laugh as I gave her gown the finishing touches. Okay, I reassured her as I moved towards my enormous jewelry chest. I pulled out white gold earrings and handed them to her. So, I started hesitantly. Are you going to write Neji's name on your boat? My voice started to drift off as I saw the expression on Tenten's face. I knew the conversation was over as she started putting the earrings on. Nope, not interested. She looked in the mirror once again to examine her ears. Besides, there are so many boys, how can I choose just one? I giggled as Tenten moved back towards the bed and began pushing through all the garments. She was wrestling with the pile until she abruptly stopped. I found your kimono. Naruto POV. The stupid yukata was fighting me for hours. Eventually, I was wrapped in the ridiculous garment like some sort of dead person. It wasn't until I mustered up the courage to walk out of my apartment and ask a neighbor for help that progress was finally made. Initially they were amused and laughed at my expense, but eventually they calmed down enough to start helping me maneuver the folds of the yukata until finally I looked like a presentable gentleman. I went back to my apartment to grab my coin purse and house keys, and as I passed I caught a glimpse of my reflection. In passing, it would have seemed like I was walking next to a stranger. It never occurred to me how much I had aged in the last few months. I looked older and more mature, though I didn't feel any different. The man in the mirror looked respectable and admittedly more handsome. I looked like someone the girls back in the ruts might fawn over. I grinned, excited to see the look on Hinata and Tenten's faces. I locked up and walked down the street. Almost immediately the smell of sweet fried dough reached my nose, and as I walked down the steps I understood where it came from. All the normal shops were closed to make room for rows upon rows of booths and tables filled with sweet treats and games. The roads were crowded with beautifully dressed men and women. Fathers were purchasing flowers for their daughters and wives, and little boys and girls were running around with fake swords play fighting. Unlike the usual blast of color the bazaars were normally attacked with, the color scheme of the festival was deep reds, pinks, and whites. I walked around and my eyes caught couples, now more open with affection, holding hands and kissing each other. Lovers were blushing furiously as they played little games winning prizes. I passed by two girls trying to encourage each other, stating that this would be the year someone wrote their names. To my complete amazement and shock, a pretty girl stopped me on my way to meeting up with Hinata. She had light brown hair and dark green eyes and was wearing a pale blue kimono. At first I was confused by why the girl was in my path. She looked at me with flirtatious eyes and tilted her head. You're really cute. Are you looking for someone's name to write on your boat? She giggled at my befuddlement. Before I could reply she ran off to join a group of cackling girls, all of whom were looking at me and laughing. I just grinned back and continued walking. These girls were becoming very assertive. I kept walking down what I thought was the right path. I couldn't be sure because instead of the regular merchants that lined the streets, different food vendors and carnival games filled my path. Suddenly strong hands pull my shoulders and I'm spun around. I looked up to see Tenten pulling me towards her and Hinata. You completely walked past us. I mean, granted I wouldn't have realized it was you if it wasn't for the hair. She laughed. It took me a minute to really recognize who was talking to me. The girl who usually kept her hair up in these ridiculous buns and only ever wore pants now looked like something out of every man's daydream. She wore her hair loose and the silky chestnut river went all the way down to her lower back. She wore a bright pink kimono that looked radiant on her. All in all she looked very good. You look weird, I callously said, to which she gave me an aggravated look. Well, you look normal for once. I suppose that was as close to a compliment as I was going to get. Tenten then moved out of the way to let me get a good look at Hinata. My mind shut down in that instant. She looked like a celestial being dressed in moonlight. Hinata was donning a beautiful silk lilac kimono painted with white and dark purple streaks. The dress flowed over her body like water and gracefully fell over her frame. Her dark blue hair was tied back in a classic bun, pulling away any distraction from her alluring face. Her eyes drifted towards my own and I saw those beautiful lashes beat against the lavender pupils and I lost my breath. My heart pounded in my chest and my knees grew weak as my eyes scanned her from head to toe. Naruto, she called. But I was still lost for words. My mouth was wide open and gaping like a fish. I had forgotten what it was to speak until Tenten hit me on the back of the head. Say something, you idiot. You look. I hesitated, trying to find the perfect adjective. Tenten eyed me with caution and I could see Hinata start to get worried. Breathtaking. Literally, you took my breath away. I finished. I could hear Tenten's sigh of relief and saw the blush creeping into Hinata's cheeks. I looked away to hide my own embarrassment. So what are we waiting for? Let's play some games. I tried to swiftly distract everyone from the encounter. Just then a green blur sped past me and scooped Tenten up from behind. All at once, a strange man was spinning her in the air and instead of being upset, Tenten was laughing. Lee, put me down, she shouted as the man dropped her back onto the ground. Once he stopped, I was able to get a good look at the mystery person. He had a funny haircut and huge bushy eyebrows. The man wore a dark green yukata with no patterns, which was uncommon for someone as young as he seemed. He looked like a complete weirdo. Tenten turned to me. This is one of my teammates and good friend, Rock Lee. Lee, this is my friend Naruto. I reached my hand out but Lee gave a deep bow instead. It is my honor to meet a friend of Tenten's, exclaimed the unusual man. You too. Lee turned to Hinata and also gave a deep bow, which Hinata returned with equal grace. It is always a pleasure to see the beautiful flower of the Hyuga clan. Lee complimented effortlessly. He turned back towards Tenten. But no woman on earth compares to the beauty that is my blossom, Tenten. The true flower of the land of fire is not the cherry blossom but instead the strong woman who stands before me. This is truly a wonderful occasion. I am so blessed to celebrate such a youthful and joyous festival with such a spring beauty. Tenten's face turned scarlet as she clapped her hands over Lee's mouth. She looked at us apologetically. Lee is easily excited, she stated, trying to quiet the man down. Lee seemed to understand the action and composed himself. I'm sorry, my new friend. But you must understand, it is the first time I'm attending this festival and it is especially monumental since my teammates will be joining me. He pumped his fist into the air, causing Hinata to giggle. Lee turned to her. The laughter of one so youthful and innocent as yourself lifts my spirits beyond the stars. Lee cheered, pulling Tenten closer towards him. I cannot wait until the boats. Though I have no one's name to write, I will still enjoy the beautiful view of loving messages swimming across the river. Lee seemed like he was about to begin a long-winded monologue about something outrageous, but almost as quickly as he started, he stopped entirely. His attention was diverted towards a stern-looking man with long blue hair that was tied back into a ponytail. The man was wearing a white yukata covered in blue patterning. As he moved closer, I noticed his eyes. His pupils were the exact same shade as Hinata's. He gave no word as he approached. He bowed slightly towards Hinata, who mimicked his gesture. Hinata-sama. He spoke to her, then turned towards Tenten and Lee, skipping over me completely. In a stoic voice, he greeted them. Lee. He nodded. Tenten. He looked her over once before also nodding. His calm demeanor didn't faze the two at all. Lee had a smile wider than a fox across his face. In one smooth and surprising motion, he pulled the man into an embrace and held him at shoulder's length. Though the man seemed uncomfortable by the gesture, he clearly wasn't surprised. Tenten giggled and looked at me. Naruto. This is Neji Hyuga. Neji. This is my friend Naruto. Neji reached his hand out and I grabbed it. He had a firm shake that was meant to intimidate, but I matched his level of pressure, trying to remain unnerved. So you're the Neji I keep hearing about. I laughed out loud. The man raised an eyebrow as the words came out of my mouth. Behind him, Tenten looked absolutely rattled by what I had said. Her eyes widened in horror as Lee looked quickly from her then to Neji then to me. Neji ignored it though. How about we go TT take part in the G games? Hinata quickly saved the situation, allowing Tenten to lead the way with Lee and Neji following suit. Hinata and I trailed behind as I gave her a mischievous smile. Tenten shot me various dirty looks over her shoulder when Neji wasn't looking. Hinata POV. The first booth we came to was coincidentally a kunai throwing game. Tenten was the one to stop and select the game. She turned to the booth and then glanced towards Neji, a cute grin on her lips. I challenge you to this game. She tugged on Neji's sleeve, forcing him to move closer. Surprisingly, he obliged and didn't pull away. Neji's ease and comfort around Tenten was out of the ordinary, especially in my presence. He looked at the various targets set up in the booth. The objective was simple. One person was given a pair of red kunai, the other green. Whoever hits more targets in a given time period wins. What's the catch? No catch, Tenten said slyly. Neji looked at her with a smirk. However, the smirk wasn't like the ones I had seen almost every morning. This wasn't filled with malice, disgust, or contempt. The smirk Neji had painted on his lips was an impish grin. I was taken aback. Who was this person in front of me? Surely not the hatred-ridden cousin who had always maintained a reserved appearance. Neji was handed green kunai and Tenten was handed red. The vendor started the time and the two experts set off. Naruto was completely immersed in the game. This was the first time he had ever seen Tenten's true skill, and even now when I watch her train I am mesmerized. She was agile and graceful. The only clear movement that could be detected by the eye was the flick of her wrist and the slight adjustments to her feet. If the viewer wasn't careful, they wouldn't even notice the kunai flying through the air, but would instead see the magic of the weapon disappear from her hand and reappear on the target. 2 minutes had passed and all the targets had been hit. Giving the stall an initial look, it would seem that Tenten and Neji were tied. See Hyuga. It's a match. Guess we're even. I wouldn't be too quick to say so. Neji then directed the gamesman to push some of the prize animals out of the way. Behind the creature were a few hidden targets, all of which had a green kunai at the center. Tenten huffed. You've got to be kidding me. She folded her arms and looked at him in utter amazement. There's no winning with you. Before Neji could respond, the vendor approached him. For reaching a ridiculous number of targets, you can choose any of the prizes on the wall. Neji scanned the selection carefully. He pointed to something that hung very high up. As the vendor brought it down with a cane, we saw an absurdly large stuffed animal panda floating down towards us. The man handed Neji the toy. I can't believe Neji Hyuga wants a stuffed animal. Lee exclaimed, holding Tenten's shoulder for support as he laughed. What an image. This isn't for me. Neji handed the animal to Tenten, who accepted it in awe. For me. She looked at the plush, a pink blush creeping over her face. In my absolute shock, I missed the rest of the conversation. Never before had I seen such a side to Neji. This man was thoughtful, considerate, open, and playful towards his teammates. The final impact came when I heard an unfamiliar sound. A laugh, quiet and brief, could be heard. I saw it come from his mouth, but I didn't put the two together until I saw his lips form into a genuine smile. Tenten had said something that made Neji laugh. Neji, the cousin that had tormented me since childhood. Neji, the cursed branch son who moped around the compound like a phantom haunting a cemetery. Neji, the man who claimed he would never experience true happiness, was standing before me laughing. The scene was unrecognizable. He had a familial closeness to both Rock Lee and Tenten, and seeing Neji like this made him more human. In that instance I understood Neji and almost connected with him. Just as Naruto and Tenten were the people I could truly be myself around, Neji's teammates were that for him. These two were his family, not by birth, but hand-chosen. Neji saw my stare and quickly maintained composure. I looked away as to not make him feel uncomfortable, but the damage was done. That was so cool. I didn't realize you were that good. Naruto threw the compliment to Tenten, who for the first time blushed at his words. She shook her head modestly. That was nothing, she said, rubbing her shoulder and looking away. Naruto moved to Neji. That thing you did with your eyes. That was amazing. Neji gave Naruto a condescending smirk that sent the latter walking backwards. For those who can properly utilize the Byakugan, it is just a small feat. Neji glanced towards me, a gesture Naruto didn't miss. He moved away from the older Hyuga and back towards me. Don't worry, Hinata, Naruto whispered to me as we walked through the street. I'll win you something better than a stupid panda. I smiled at his words. That's okay, Naruto-kun. Your company is all I want. Naruto quickly looked away, leaving me confused and once again embarrassed. The next stop we made was at a game Lee had chosen. It was a strong man competition where men take turns trying hit a button with a mallet. The pressure applied to the button forces a small wooden block to move up a tube. The objective is to hit the button with such force as to make the wooden block reach the top of the tube, thus ringing a bell placed at the top. Lee strode up to the man confidently. After handing him a few coins, he grabbed the mallet and looked towards us. This is nothing compared to Academy, he claimed. Just as he was about to bring the mallet down, the vendor stopped him. Sorry man, but Academy graduates are not allowed to take part in this game. It's not fair. The man pointed to a sign that stated just that. He handed Lee his money back and the disappointed patron walked back to us. That sucks, man. How far do you think you would have gotten? Naruto asked Lee, trying to engage the man in conversation. I would have rung the bell, Lee replied as Tenten and Neji nodded in agreement. Naruto was thrown off guard. What, seriously? What makes you so sure? Tenten interjected. Lee is a taijutsu specialist. Strength is what he does best. She laughed as Lee proceeded to flex his muscles. I never stop training. Guy-sensei would be disappointed if I took even one break. Even now I'm wearing ankle weights. He proved his point by raising the hem of his yukata, revealing orange weights. Naruto's face, however, did not seem impressed. Instead, he looked at me and made a strange face that forced me to smile. Lee was unfazed. But before the man could go on any further, Naruto grabbed my wrist and pulled me towards a booth. I looked over my shoulder and saw Neji looking at us with a stern expression, but I ignored it and turned my attention towards the new game. Naruto had already handed over a few coins to the owner of the booth. I'm going to win you that giant elephant, he said, pointing high up at the oversized animal. Then he grabbed a few rings and began to toss the brightly colored circles onto bottles. He didn't miss a single one. Similar to Tenten, Naruto was completely focused and extremely talented. It seemed like he had done this his whole life. He managed to make all of the rings onto each bottle. The man looked at him with annoyance. Pick whatever you want. I want the. But he didn't finish. Something else caught Naruto's eyes and he swiftly moved across the counter and grabbed it. Naruto turned to me and opened his palms. Inside was an elegant white gemmed flower attached to a small hair comb. He looked at me carefully. This would look really pretty in your hair right now. He motioned for me to move closer and I obliged. However, he seemed to have trouble attaching the hair accessory and opted to call Tenten over to place it for him. Tenten settled on placing the flower to the side of my head and I felt its weight on my hair. How do ILL look? Honestly, I don't even notice the flower. You're just more distracting. His voice trailed off as he realized what he had admitted. Naruto shuffled his feet and looked towards the other booths, giving me a chance to recover myself. From the corner of my eyes I saw Lee beaming at me and Tenten smiling widely. I glanced at Neji. What I assumed was the same expression I had donned earlier was now on his face. Confusion, surprise, bewilderment, and most of all, intrigue. The sailing of the boats starts in 15 minutes. All women are to be on the south side of the river and the men on the north. A booming voice called from a nearby towers. Several other similar announcements were made from different towers. I looked towards Tenten. Okay, so we'll head over to the river and then meet you guys back here afterwards. She asked. I'll just stay here and wait for you to finish. Neji responded. What do you mean? Tenten looked from Neji then to me, unable to comprehend what he was implying. I'm not taking part in them. Why not? Because I don't want to. Tenten's face was slowing, starting to turn pink, and her eyebrows furrowed, still in confusion coupled with anger. What? Neji, the whole point of this festival are these boats. You're doing this. She commanded him. Lee began to pull her back, but she pushed him off. Neji looked irritated. I do what I want and I do not want to do this. He moved closer to her, trying to intimidate the girl. But Tenten was never one to back down. She went for a different method. Softening her eyes, she spoke a little quieter. Neji, come on. This is one of those once-in-a-lifetime memories that you can look fondly on. Even if there isn't anyone for you to write, at least come and watch the boats. Please. For me. Her words, light but confident, broke through his ranks. He sighed. Fine. Let's go, Lee, and you. He said, pointing to Naruto, who looked at him with disgust. It's Naruto. He mumbled as he followed the other men towards the north side of the river. Tenten and I walked with several other women, each in different emotional states, towards the south bank of the river. The north bank crept along the city, whereas the southern bank was covered in forest and trees. The juxtaposition of modernization and nature was beautiful. As we crossed the bridge, I saw young men and fully grown adults stand along the river holding small boats and lit candles. Around me, pretty girls whispered in excitement. For some it was their first time, and like me, they were going to confess their love tonight. For others, their boyfriends or husbands were on the other side and were relaxed and confident, having been veterans. Tenten and I finally crossed the bridge and stood on the river's edge. As we awaited instructions, Tenten dropped her panda delicately underneath a tree and lifted her kimono up to splash her feet about in the river water. It looked dark and deep, and if it weren't for the city lights, I expect I wouldn't see anything on the other side of the river. I imagined being the kunoichi in the story, looking into the emptiness, awaiting any sign of my ninja. I felt a small tug on my kimono. I looked down to find a girl about 12 holding a basket of papers and wooden pencils. Next to her was another girl, slightly older, holding a crate of small wooden boats, and next to that girl was another, though closer to the age of 7, holding a box of candles and matches. They handed me a boat, piece of paper, a match, candle, and pen, then told me very clear instructions. The men on the other side would send their boats over first. Young boys, who were too young to partake, would be along the banks creating waves and forcing the boats over. Once all the boats had reached, the same girls would come around and collect the papers to sort them out for easy distribution. While this is happening, the women will send their boats over. The idea seemed simple enough. I grabbed 2 pairs of supplies and walked over to Tenten. I sat down next to her on the grass and looked back across the river. You're going to do it. Tenten reassured me. I nodded and picked up the pencil and paper. Though I was slow to start, I wrote down an N then a then in Naruto. It was simple enough and was all I needed to say. I looked over at Tenten's paper. She was covering her sheet and it was too dark to read anyways, but I knew whose name she was writing. She quickly folded the paper and slid it into the boat. Tenten looked over at me and gave me a nervous smile. She looked across the lake, wringing her hands and biting her lips. Naruto POV. I looked at the small boat in my hands and tossed it around as I waited for a little boy to hand me a pencil and paper. He handed me a few sheets and pencils to pass around the group of men behind me. I turned around and handed Lee a sheet and pencil, who then passed the supplies to Neji. I glanced around at the other men. There was a guy around my age with gray hair wringing his hands and murmuring to himself. He was clearly trying to work up the courage to write someone's name down. To the right of him was another man who was already placing a piece of paper into his boat, a smiling playing on his face. I looked to my left and saw a small woman with purple hair and a strong face looking deeply across the river. I turned to her in incredible surprise. What are you doing on this side of the river? She looked around to make sure I was speaking to her. Once she was sure the question was directed towards her, she straightened her back and looked me directly in the eyes. Without any hesitation, she responded. The woman I love is on the other side of the river. The woman continued to stare, daring me to say something. I could feel my face turning red quickly, and I tried to hide my embarrassment. How could I have been so inconsiderate? Oh geez, I'm, really sorry. I didn't mean, she cut me off. It's really okay, she said with a smile, scribbling away a long paragraph on her paper. She stopped and looked at me again. She pointed across the river. My longtime girlfriend is somewhere over there. A huge grin suddenly appeared on her face, and very quickly she broke out into a riotous giggle. I'm going to ask her to marry me tonight. Oh, congratulations. I threw at her in shock. Admittedly, it was the first time I had ever met someone like her. I hope she says yes. I couldn't help but say. The woman nodded. Me too. She went back to writing the rest of her essay on the boat. I left her to her thoughts and moved back towards Neji and Lee, who were currently in a heated argument. Neji, you are young and should embrace the traditions and customs of our generation. No thank you, Lee. Neji tried to push the man away, but Lee wasn't having any of it. He poked Neji very hard in the chest, but Neji didn't move. Lee looked stern, which was surprising since he came off as someone who could never be taken seriously. He looked Neji straight in the eyes and said, "Write a name." No. In a last-ditch attempt, Lee pulled out an unpredictable move. Neji Hyuga, son of Hisashi Hyuga, you bring shame and dishonor to a clan of long-standing and proud family. How dare you not participate in the traditions of the new youth of R? Lee was quickly quieted down by Neji's palm. Through gritted teeth, Neji whispered, "Fine." He looked over at me and saw me watching. Neji turned away and scribbled a name onto the paper. Unbeknown to him though, I saw him slip the paper into his pocket while Lee had his back turned. I didn't say anything. Lee then turned his attention to me. With wide eyes and a grin on his face, he nudged me with his elbow. So who are you putting down on your paper? I froze. In complete shock, I responded. I don't know. Lee looked at me strangely. My face must have looked completely stricken, for Lee responded oddly. You seem to have a lot to think about. I will leave you to your thoughts. He moved back towards Neji. I walked to the bank of the river and peered out across the water. I could see nothing. No one had lit their candles yet, and the moonlight was not enough to uncover what the trees had hidden away. Somewhere across that lake, Hinata was writing someone's name. I was confused. The same dilemma and the same feelings I had felt that morning were coming back, and though I didn't want to face them then, I had to now. There was Sakura, an unobtainable and completely familiar love, or Hinata. For the first time, I admitted to myself that I was thinking about Hinata as something more than a friend. But was it more than how I felt about Sakura? A high-pitched voice broke my thoughts. You're having a hard time, huh? I looked down to see the girl from earlier. I nodded. Are you deciding whose name to write? I nodded once again. She had a knowing look in her eyes, and she moved away from me and towards the river. I followed and watched as she removed her sandals and stuck her feet in. I did the same. The girl pointed across the river. I hear it helps to imagine them on the other side. Then imagine their boats floating towards you. Whose boat would you rather have your name written on it? In other words, for which one would your heart break if they didn't love you back? She looked back at me one final time. Good luck, she exclaimed and walked back towards her own boat and candle. I closed my eyes and imagined the two girls on the other side of the river. Sakura and Hinata. I pictured them writing down a name on a sheet of paper and pushing it across the water. In my mind's eyes, I saw myself picking up only one boat and reading the name. I had only picked up one boat. I let the other boat float on the water and eventually sail in the other direction. The boat I held in my hand was the only boat, the only response, that mattered to me. I took my pencil, scribbled down her name, folded it up, confidently placed it in the boat, and lit the candle. A whistle blew and all the men and women were pushing their boats into the water. I watched as my answer floated away. Hinata POV. I heard a faint whistle and suddenly saw hundreds of small candles light up across the river. The darkness of the night masked the men holding the candles, creating the illusion of magical floating balls of light moving towards the river. Minutes later, those fairy-tale-like little boats began to float towards us, illuminating the water. My eyes drowned in the enchanting form of what looked like tiny suns swimming towards us. In that moment I knew what the kunoichi in the story felt. Amazement, wonder, and anticipation rushed through me as the boats sailed closer and closer. When the first boat hit the shore, everyone cheered as an older woman around 30 rushed to grab it. She opened up the paper on the boat and shouted out, "Amy!" A small girl rushed up to her and collected the paper as more cheers arose. Everyone was racing to the shore to grab a boat. Tenten grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the water. I picked up and examined the nearest one, carefully looking for the slip of paper. As I pulled it out, I saw Tenten passing hers to a little girl who was collecting them. "Once you turn in the paper, you can send your boat over," the girl informed us. I quickly pulled out the slip and read it. "Suki." The child collected the slip and I moved back towards the shore and gently placed my boat on the water. It didn't move but instead floated on top of the river, bobbing up and down. Tenten looked at me with similar confusion, but soon waves suddenly arose. I looked over to find the young girls who had collected the papers were now holding large paddles and creating waves on the riverfront. The forceful waves pushed the boats across the river and I saw my own start to blend in with the otherworldly array of light. I lost sight of my boat and sat down next to Tenten, who was also watching the ships sail away. Some time later a gaggle of small girls were walking along the shore holding baskets of papers that were carefully organized and folded away. They came up to each woman and asked for their full name. Then the girls would sort through their collection and hand over any slips. They reached us. "Your name, Tenten. Your full name please," one girl said irritably. Tenten shot her a glare. "That is my full name." The girl looked at her amused. Another girl next to her was ruffling through the basket and pulled out a small pile. She handed it to Tenten, who counted through them. The first girl then looked to me. "Hinata H. Hyuga." I saw her eyes widen and the other girl looked furiously for my name. The smallest one whispered to her friend. I saw her name but I didn't believe it. "A Hyuga. She looks as pretty as they say." She shyly looked up at me and I smiled back at her. The girl with the basket handed me a paper and then scurried away. I gripped the paper tightly and looked at her in astonishment as she hid behind her basket. Thank you," I quickly said as I spun around to look at Tenten. Her chocolate brown eyes met my own and we both started laughing. The girls giggled and walked onto the next pair of women. "That has to be Naruto. I mean, who else would write your name?" I was trying very hard to remain calm. It was difficult not to assume that Naruto had written my name. It could have very well been a suitor who had taken a liking to me, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared to be heartbroken if this was the outcome. I changed the topic. "How many DD did you receive?" Tenten blushed as she flipped through the sheets. "I got 5, she said in surprise. I seriously wasn't expecting this many. Is there anyone in PP particular you're hoping one is from?" I questioned, trying to coax out the truth. She looked away from me and back at the river. Tenten took a deep breath and hesitantly turned back to face me. Neji," she whispered. "I'm hoping Neji wrote my name." "Gosh, Hina, can you believe how stupid I am?" She threw her hands onto my shoulders and looked up at the stars. I fell for my stupid teammate. "I know. What?" She gawked at me. "I've known for a while now." I peered over her shoulder and looked at the opposite side of the river, my mind still thinking about Naruto. Tenten grabbed my chin and forced me to listen to her. "Is it obvious?" "No. Please do not worry. No one has noticed." I blatantly lied. I was sure that both Lee and Naruto also knew about Tenten's affections for Neji. Most likely, Neji was the only one who was oblivious towards her emotions. Either that or he was choosing to ignore it. Oh my god, Hina. I must have looked like a total moron this whole time. She said as we walked back across the bridge. I mean, this whole time I was trying to deny it, but you knew anyways. I guess that makes sense though, since you are my best friend. While crossing the bridge, Tenten continued to talk a little more about her feelings about Neji. She said she began to develop a crush on the Hyuga boy when they had their first one-on-one training session without Lear Guy Sensei. She said he stopped being so arrogant and haughty and began to talk to her in a friendlier way. She knew she liked him when he gave her his first ever compliment. You're an excellent match. It's always a pleasure to train with you. Her heart gave out and she was completely intoxicated with him. But he had never made any advances or shown any interest in her as anything other than a teammate, so she tried to push those feelings away. But if one of these are from him, then my entire night will be perfect. As she was about to continue her story, a tall man with shaggy hair called out to Tenten. He rushed over and stood in front of her and gasped. Tenten, did you write my name? He said, waving his paper in front of her. He grabbed her hand. Did you get mine? She pulled her hand away and grabbed the sheets she had tucked into hidden pockets. She shuffled through them and handed a few to him. He pulled the one he had written out and given them back to her. This one is mine. So how about it? Oh, sorry man. That wasn't me, she awkwardly informed. The man looked dejected and moved back. Oh, yeah, that's fine then. I guess I'll just try to find whoever it was that wrote my name then. He walked away a lot less confident. Tenten placed the slips back into her pocket. Well, that's one down. As we walked, more and more men approached Tenten to ask if she had written their names in return. One by one, men were confessing their feelings and Tenten had to repeatedly put down their advances. By the time we reached our meeting spot, Tenten was down to her last unknown slip and she was confident that it had to have been from Neji. The guys were already there when we arrived. So how did you like it? Tenten asked them. Lee was the first to respond. That was beautiful and youthful. He roared. Though I didn't receive a single confession, the sight was magnificent. Tenten and I giggled as Neji shook his head in dismay. Tenten turned her focus to him, wide-eyed with anticipation. So how many slips did you get? 11. He replied uninterestedly and pulled out a stack. I gasped in surprise. Did that many people know Neji well enough to really write his name? He must have read my face. Probably girls who have only seen me around and know of my name. Well, don't you want to know who they're from? Tenten tried to egg him on. Not really, he said as he dropped papers into a nearby rubbish bin. Lee gasped in horror. Naruto quickly reached out to catch them before they landed in the garbage. He stormed up to Neji with a fistful of papers. These girls, whoever they are, whatever their motives were, wrote down their feelings for you. You should keep them. He shoved the crumpled papers into Neji's hands, who looked at him with amusement. Neji just took the pile and threw them back into his pocket. So Naruto, did you receive any? Naruto looked at her, caught off guard. His face switched from anger to embarrassment. He pulled out one single sheet. Yeah. He looked at me then quickly looked away. I hid my face behind my own single sheet of paper. Tenten diffused the tension by redirecting her interrogation back towards Neji. Though it must have hurt to ask, Tenten ventured on. So who did you write on your paper? But before Neji could answer, a stylish man with slicked back hair approached Tenten and greeted her with a dazzling smile. He pulled out a piece of paper and addressed her. I'm just going to come out and say it. I wrote your name down and I'm really hoping that this one is from you. He waved the sheet in front of her face. Tenten pulled out her own pile and from it procured the very last mystery paper. The man grinned as he told her that one was from him. I didn't write your name, she said quietly. He gloomily shuffled away, leaving Tenten holding the sheets and trying to recover her composure. Looks like you also had a lot of confessions, Neji stated. Tenten looked up and I could see the realization forming in her mind. All 5 of the responses she received were from other men. Neji did not write her name. I felt heartbroken for her. Yeah, so it seems. She threw the papers away into the wastebasket, but this time Naruto didn't stop her. He too felt the sudden change in atmosphere. Tenten's hands were shaking as she turned slowly back towards Neji. Her eyes met mine and anguish washed over me. I saw her sorrow threatening to burst in the form of tears. Composing herself, she spoke softly. It's been a long night. I think I want to go home. No one argued with her. Lee nodded his head. I agree. Neji said. I'll walk you home. No thank you. She replied a little too quickly. Neji didn't have the chance to mask how offended he clearly was. Tenten walked over to Lee. I'd rather have Lee take me home if it's alright with you. Without giving Neji the opportunity to speak up, Tenten grabbed Rock Lee and walked in the other direction. Neji was left alone with me and Naruto, though he didn't notice at first. He was looking at where Tenten and Lee had been, still a little disoriented. Finally, after a few seconds, he looked at me. If you will excuse me, I will head back to the compound. I'm sure this young man will escort you home safely. Then Neji left in a blur. I looked at Naruto, who seemed confused by the events. We stood there in silence, comprehending what had just happened. Do you want to go home? Naruto asked, though clearly he didn't want us to leave. I would like to spend the remainder of my time here with you at the fair. Naruto POV. I was astounded by what had occurred. In just 5 minutes, our entire group disbanded and Hinata and I were left to ourselves for the rest of the night. I was trying to recover from the dramatic events. As we silently walked through the crowd, I could still see Tenten's grief-stricken face. She always talked about Neji in the fondest of voices, and it was clear since the second she said his name that she was in love with him. She always tried to deny it, but whenever I made fun of her for it, I could see her secretly smiling at the idea of her and Neji being together. I assumed he was decent guy since Tenten was a great girl. But the man I met was, to put it frankly, a dick. He was rude and mean to Hinata even though she was still kind to him. He was arrogant and ridiculously pretentious as he pretended not to know my name, though he was clearly doing it on purpose. Neji was a tremendous asshole, and the icing on the bullshit cake was when he tried to throw away his confessions. Maybe the majority of them were from unknown women, but I knew one of them was from Tenten. So to see him try to dispose of Tenten's attempt to finally tell him about her love was too much for me to handle. And Tenten. What had happened? 1 second she was prodding Neji to tell her who he had written, though I knew already he hadn't sent it over. The next she became cold and closed off. She left without even saying goodbye. I hated him. A crowded bar, overflowing with people around our age, caught my attention, distracting me from my thoughts about Neji Hyuga. The music from the establishment was so melodic and uplifting. I looked down at Hinata and found that she was also looking towards the bar. I grabbed her hand and took her closer. As we moved, I could hear the music grow louder and the chattering escalated. We swam through the people and passed across the threshold. I pushed patrons out of our way until we found ourselves at the edge of a dance floor. Displayed before us was a hodgepodge of multiple couples dancing to the music in an asynchronous way. None of the couples were matching the others in their moves. One couple was waltzing gracefully and another was throwing themselves around. Off to one corner was a small band, happily playing the upbeat tempo that fueled the energy of the bar. Without even asking, I grabbed Hinata by the waist and pulled her onto the dance floor. She clung onto my yukata for support as I dragged her towards the center. At first we stood there unsure of what to do. I shuffled my feet and swayed side to side embarrassingly as Hinata tried to fix her ruffled kimono. Finally, after watching some of the other couples for a bit, I confidently wrapped one arm around her waist, used the other to hold her hand high into the air and spun her a few times around the floor. A twinkling laugh left her gossamer lips and I grinned broadly. We waltzed around the entirety of the floor, making up our own arbitrary dance moves, and whooped and snorted in pure glee. Finally the music slowed down for a bit and I pulled her in closer until I knew she could feel my breath on the top of her head. I smelled the flowery perfume on her person and the moment felt so intimate. It felt like the right time to tell her. Hinata. I started. She looked up at me with those pearlescent orbs. I wrote your name. She stopped dancing and gripped my hand. After a deep breath, she smiled. I wrote yours too. I dropped her hand, picked her up by the waist, and spun her dramatically, finally landing her back on the ground. I lifted her chin up to take a good look at her. Then I kissed her. I couldn't let go. Instead, I pulled her in closer and tighter, pressing her lips firmly to mine. I could feel Hinata lean into me, and we were suspended there for however long, just holding each other. Finally, she moved back, though I could feel my body instinctively moving closer to close the distance. I pulled back though, realizing I was acting a little childish. She looked at me, and in that moment, as cliché as it sounds, I knew I loved her. I knew, with every fiber of my stupid, impure, unworthy being, that I was in love with this dazzling and kind and gentle and strong creature. We said nothing more for the rest of our time at the bar, but we didn't have to. Our actions, our closeness, our intimacy said enough. For about an hour, Hinata and I danced. Our moves were mostly spins and twirls, accompanied by moments of tightness in which we would sway back and forth into one another. Couples came and went, but we stayed on the dance floor until the late bells chimed. Finally, Hinata spoke. I should be back at the compound soon, or else my father will worry. I nodded and held her hand as I led the way out of the bar. Walking onto the street, I realized how late it actually was. The booths were closing and vendors were tearing down well-crafted stalls. The roads were empty, giving us the impression that we were the only people there in the entire world, as if this festival was set up purely for us to succumb to one another. There isn't enough flowery writing and provocative words in our language to capture how amazing I felt on that walk home. We were a few meters from the compound wall, just far enough so that Hinata could plant a delicate kiss on my lips without anyone knowing. I pulled her in once more, and we kissed for the second time that night. Her face flushed as she said goodnight and walked away. I watched her until she faded into darkness and finally settled on going home. I strolled down the path, still feeling high from the intoxicating kiss. However, instead of feeling euphoric, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I made my way home. Unsure at first, but with each step the feeling grew stronger. My ninja instincts were telling me that something was out of place. I stopped and looked around but couldn't find anything out of the ordinary, but for some reason, I felt like I was being followed. Usually I would have opted to take the shorter but more secluded path, but I knew better than to risk attack. Besides, on the open pavement, there was little place to hide. I rushed towards the city center, and from the corner of my eyes, I detected black blurs. The ordinary citizen would not have seen anything, but years of training taught me otherwise. My suspicions were confirmed when I spied a man in an oversized coat shift behind a building. I kept my head down and pushed forwards. In an attempt to throw the pursuers off of my trail, I ran. Sprinting through back alleys and main roads, I hoped that they wouldn't be able to keep up with my speed. I could see it in the distance, my apartment shining like a beacon. My foot landed on the first step, but my path was blocked. Two men, draped in black cloaks covered in red clouds, stood before me. The first man looked unusual and inhuman. He had blue skin and sharp angular features. Beady black eyes stared at me in a primal way. He kept one hand held onto a hilt that belonged to a massive sword on his back. The other one looked familiar. I felt a bang in my chest. Sasuke. I knew the answer as soon as I had said his name. The first guy laughed as I scanned the second intruder closer. His hair was longer, his features more mature, and his height a little taller. This man wasn't Sasuke, but he looked almost like him. The second man spoke. That's a name I haven't heard in some time, he said in a quiet, low voice. The first laughed even louder, moving closer to me. I assumed fighting position and growled. What do you want? The first man grinned, and that's when I noticed razor-sharp teeth. This man, it finally occurred to me, looked like a shark. I slowly tried to move my hand into the inside pocket of my yukata where I kept a kunai. After an initial assessment of my scenario, I could tell I was outmatched. Even though I hadn't seen their skill, I could sense their overwhelmingly strong chakra and could tell these men were no ordinary nin. But that wasn't going to deter me. In fact, in a strange way, I was excited for the challenge. I smiled back. The carnival ended hours ago, you can take your makeup off, I said, egging the first one on. Clever, I heard from behind me. Before my sentence was even over, the first guy had moved behind me, ready to attack. The original excitement had left and true panic entered. I prepared myself of a heavy blow. But the man didn't attack. Someone else had appeared between the two of us. I turned to find Jiraiya positioned between me and Shark Man. He had his hands out in what appeared to be in a skilled formation, ready to summon. The second man spoke again. We weren't expecting you tonight, Jiraiya. He moved himself next to his partner and faced me. Jiraiya was unnerved. Leave or there will be hell to pay. We can take you on, old man, shouted the first guy. He pulled the sword from behind his back. It looked large and dull, with a curved and blunt edge. The sword was covered in wrapping, and how it was supposed to help in combat was beyond me. Jiraiya inhaled quickly in recognition. I see you recognize her, he said, skillfully wielding and spinning the heavy weapon. Jiraiya moved back an inch and I ran to meet him. But as I moved closer, Jiraiya pushed me back. Don't. The shark raised his eyebrows. You plan to protect the boy? TCH, this was supposed to be a quick grab and go, but I guess we can stop to play. He rushed towards Jiraiya, sword in hand, but before he could throw down, his partner stood before him. He looked at us and I saw the frightening curse that was the Sharingan. But it was different. The pattern in his eyes weren't the same as Sasuke's. His looked like sharp discs and the sight was both disturbing yet comforting. He directed himself back to his partner. Not tonight. With just those two words, he vanished. The shark sighed and placed his sword back into its holster. I'll see you around, he said before disappearing. I struggled to comprehend their actions as Jiraiya and I quickly entered the apartment. Suddenly they had appeared and then vanished without reaching whatever their goal was. Jiraiya dropped his bags and furrowed his eyebrows as he looked at me. Who were those men? I shouted, unable to hold back my rage. What the hell just happened? Jiraiya looked at me calmly and moved towards the window. He looked out, checked the surroundings, then closed the blinds. I don't sense their chakras anymore, he whispered mainly to himself, then sat down at the table. He motioned for me to take a seat. Jiraiya, who was that other guy? Those two men are from the Akatsuki. Before I could interject, Jiraiya continued. That man that spoke to us was Kisame Hoshigaki, from the village of the Hidden Mist. The other one, Itachi Uchiha. Itachi Uchiha. I was in the midst of the mass murderer who had started the chain events of my adolescent life. The very man Sasuke was training desperately to kill was just standing in front of me second ago. That was Itachi. I shrieked. What was he doing here? Jiraiya stood up to get a drink. He grabbed a green bottle and finished it in just a minute. It's been a long night, Naruto. How about we talk about this in the morning? No, I need answers now. I mean, why were they even here? Jiraiya ignored me and moved towards the bed. I followed him in hot pursuit. You have to tell me something, Naruto, he began with a tired voice. I learned a lot today and I need some time to process the information. Please. I left him alone and moved back to my bed, still traumatized and weary. Before I pulled the covers over me, Jiraiya managed to throw in one last quip. So, did you get any boats? He remarked slyly, turning out the lights. I said nothing but fell asleep with a smile on my face.